Okay.
All right, look at that.
We'll be live in a moment.
It's just device fusion.
I know.
All right.
Okay.
Very good. Well, I will announce
And we're up. Good.
this is a work session with South Kingstown Town Council to discuss our goals and objectives and code of conduct for the coming term. It is Monday, February 1st, 2021. The time is now 7:05. Our first order of business is the pledge to the flag. Susan, if you would please lead us in that, would be great.
I will. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And tonight's meeting is fairly straightforward. Just have two other items. The first is to review the town council's goals and objectives. And really these have been sort of in place for years and years. Every couple of years we tweak them, add things, remove things based on what we've accomplished and what we want to see changed. Hopefully everybody's had a little time to review them. Rob, I don't know if you wanted to take maybe you could bring up on your screen the goals and objectives that are in place, and we can sort of have a discussion around those, or how do you want to approach it?
Sure. So I did have a chance to send to the council some information, a PowerPoint slide or a slide deck, and some thoughts on tweaking the goals and objectives that you've got. We can think about the goals and objectives as sort of concentric circles. You can think about it as sort of the priority areas being the biggest category. And we have 12 priority categories right now. They're called things like budget and finance. We've got a circulation priority area, which really has to do with transportation. We've got an education priority area. But the largest area in this exercise is the biggest concentric circle is the priority areas. And as I say, we've had 12 of those for the last number of years. I've suggested we add one, or actually that we break one apart so that we'd end up with 13 priority areas. And then once you get your priority areas set, you have to talk about what your goals are for each of those 12 or 13 priority areas. What are your goals with regard to education? What are your goals with regard to the budget and finance? What are your goals with regard to transportation? And then once you've identified your goals, and goals are really long-term in their focus, I tend to think of goals as what you want to see 10 or 15 years out. It's a big, it's a big honking, objective. It's not what you want to see next week. This is not our diet goals for the next month. This is the community's goals for the long term. So 10 or 15 years out, what do we want the community's education program to look like? What do we want to see in terms of affordable housing 10 or 15 years out? What's our objective? What's our goal? And I'll start the slide deck in a minute, which sort of focuses our attention on the difference between a goal and an objective. And then the tight concentric circle, the middle, the bullseye, if you will, is what is it that we want to achieve toward those long-term goals in those priority areas in the next year or two. So we go from big priority areas to goals within those priority areas to the objectives for the next year or two. And with that sort of introduction, let me pull up a PowerPoint slide. Right. And I'm going to start the show. So this is my cute graphic to suggest the difference between a goal and objective. The goal is the ultimate aim. It's what we want to get to in the long run. Our objectives are the way we get there. It's the passes from foot to foot down the field to get to that long Latinx goal. It's the long-term thing. It's not what we're trying to do next year or in the next couple of years. It's what we're looking for in the long run. An objective is very specific. We're looking for objectives that we can execute in the next year or two. They're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're timed. I'm suggesting a time frame of a year or two. It makes sense to focus on that time frame for a town council that has a 2-year term. Obviously, if we have an objective that takes 3 or 4 or 5 years, that's fine. But to the extent that we can give them really tight deadlines, that's a good idea. The goals, on the other hand, are very aspirational. They're wishful. I wish we had more of this or less of that. I wish, everything could stay the same with regard to this priority area. They're aspirational. They're what we're aiming for. This is the design that the community wants to see in the long run. Sometimes they're naive. Goals don't have to be attainable immediately. They don't need to be, if we wanted to build a 30-tower, hotel on Marina Park, it's not going to happen in the next 5 years. That's something you'd have to build toward over a long, long period of time. I suspect there's not many takers on that suggestion, but my point is they don't have to be grounded. A goal really can be a wish. It can be something we want to achieve. And they tend to be timeless. Goals tend to be things that you're going to want forever. They're things you're going to want because they're just inherently good. They're things that we believe are just important in a very broad context. Now, for planning purposes, we do this sort of in reverse. Well, I suppose it's not really in reverse, but we start by describing our goals. What do we want the community to look like in the long term, 10, 15, 20, 50 years out? Then we devise short-term and mid-term strategic objectives that will help us get there. We know what the goal is, we know where the goalposts are, and we know where the players on the field are. So the strategy then becomes, or the tactics become, how do we get the ball down the field to that long-term objective? Now, this is the shift in priority areas that I would ask the council to consider. Obviously, this list is owned by the council. There is a relationship between this list and the budget process and the budget award process. Every year, for many years now, South Kingstown has received an award for its budget presentation. We try very hard to make sure that we're presenting how we're spending the money to the public in a way that is easy for the public to understand and follow. We try to make sure that we are being transparent in that we structure our budget in a way that people can follow. Goals and objectives are one of the ways that budgets are expected by the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, one of the ways that you're supposed to organize your budgets, because it makes it understandable, it makes it concrete, and most importantly, it ties your spending back to the priorities of the elected officials in the town. So we can play with this list, we can move this list around, but we need to have a list of priorities. We need to have a set of goals that are the things we're going to try to achieve through our spending plan. This isn't just an exercise in sort of wishful thinking or an exercise in focusing my attention, the town employees' attention. This really becomes the basis for our spend plan. It should become the basis for our spend plan. We should not be spending money on things that the people and the people through their representatives don't want us spending money on. So these priority areas are very important. Now, I've suggested change to the budget development and fiscal. On the left side of this screen are the 12 priority areas that we have had for years. On the right side of the screen are changes that I'm suggesting. And again, this is the council's list, so please take these only as suggestions. But I would suggest that we need to have something in the budget and fiscal management that also speaks to taxes. This is what matters to people more than anything else. They don't really care what accounting standard or what accounting practice we engage in. They do care about what the bottom line is for them. So I think that the category needs to state expressly that budget and finance are related to the bottom line for individual taxpayers. Provision of core services, I've just truncated to core services and facilities. Communication and education. I think that the communication piece, in fact, historically what the communication piece has been in the objectives is to talk to and work with the advisory committees more effectively. But I think there's a communication issue in South Kingstown now, and maybe in the rest of the country at this point, where we need to spend some time thinking about goals and some objectives in the short run regarding public participation more broadly and civic engagement. Facebook is destroying the world, and we've got to react to that fact. I mean, we just have to respond to the fact that the environment within which communication happens at the local level is changing, and we're not with it, and that's not good. The education piece, in our two objectives related to education, it's really, there's two things. Better communication with the school committee and figuring out what we're going to do in the face of declining student population. Those are the only two objectives related to transportation that we've had over the last several years. In the recent joint work session with the school committee, a number of others have come up, and I'll get to those later because those were sort of draft suggestions that came out of your work session with the school committee. But I think there's something broader there. And it's helpful. Again, if you think about the budget, 76% of our budget, 76% of our budget goes to the education program. Having some explanation of what the rationale for that ratio is helpful. The GFOA folks who look at our budget, if they see that there's a clear rationale for the level of spending, it helps explain why our budget is structured the way it is. It also helps, I think, with the public. I also think, though, that there's more to education than we've stuffed into this category in the past. We don't, in South Kingstown, have any stated objective with regard to adult learning or lifelong learning. We only speak to the under 18 student population. And we don't speak to education or training with regard to our workforce. And I think that there's room for us to do something about talking in our goals and objectives, or your goals and objectives, about what you'd like to see in terms of the skill set and the training associated with that skill set for town employees. Land use is land use. Land use and housing could possibly be rolled into one category. I have not done that. There's reasons for doing that, and there's lots of reasons for not doing that. We will get into that discussion on Wednesday with the Planning Board, the Affordable Housing Collaborative, and this one other group. Oh boy, Conservation Commission, I think. Sustainability and environmental and natural resources. I've just truncated to sustainability and natural resources. Cultural and historic resources, the theory that that history and historic resources are cultural priorities. I've just made them cultural priorities. This next one, I think, is an important shift in thinking. Economic development, everybody talks about it, nobody knows what they mean by it. And I think we need to sort of break a psychological cycle around economic development. When we talk about economic development at the local level, far too often we talk about real estate development. It's all about real estate development. Where can we put these guys? Where, what can we do to attract, Shepherd's Run? Or what can we do to make sure that the building over at Schneider Electric is occupied by a good business when Schneider Electric finally leaves? It's all about real estate development. And there's so much more to an economy, a local economy, and local economic activity. I think that the goal, the priority area, is really about what do we want the economy to look like? Do we want it to be a tourist economy? Do we want more manufacturing in our economy? Do we want more of a commuter economy? Do we really want to focus and help beef up or do whatever we can to encourage research and development around URI? If we want to do that, by the way, then that does have implications for our land use policy. Currently, it is impossible, given our zoning, to set up a lab across the street from URI. We do not allow it. It's not allowed in the zone that surrounds URI. If we're gonna change the way we do our economic structure, or if we have priorities around economic structuring that are in conflict with our current policies, that's, I would suggest, low-hanging fruit, but it's something we need to address. Circulation, I think, is really just transportation and traffic safety. We talk about it often, and we talk about it as transportation and traffic safety, and I would just suggest that that be changed to use the common nomenclature. Special needs populations, it's supporting vulnerable people or supporting special needs, but I think it's about the support. It's an interesting language thing. University of Rhode Island is still a priority, I imagine. I don't know what else you'd call it, and the same is true for South County Hospital. So the first sort of exercise is to decide whether this is the list that the council wants, or are there things that are missing from this list or that are on this list that should come off the list? Are the priority areas correct? And I'll leave it to you at this point.
Hey, thanks, Rob. So yeah, I'll just open the floor to anybody who wants to chime in. And I think with a small group like this on a work session, don't worry about like raising your hand or anything. I think we probably just have a discussion.
So Jess Rose here. I did raise my hand, but I'll lower it. I would like to consider putting something, sorry, I've got kids talking in the background. CJ, hush. I'd like to look at what policing looks like in South Kingstown and, you know, what we picture that being in both the short term and the long term.
All right, yeah, I mean, I think that's an obvious sort of thing that we don't see, like public safety necessarily in this list. And it is a big service that we provide. So maybe that belongs there as well, especially given the past year when, you know, the pandemic has hit and so much attention has been placed on public health protection and policy, and how does that fit into public safety? So, you know, I think that that is probably an increasingly important thing to.
So just so we sort of have a process going forward, we're going to be taking notes. You can't vote tonight because we haven't noticed any votes. So we'll produce a report that has the new priority list, the new goals, and the new objectives. You'll have that to look at and amend at a meeting, not next week, but probably two meetings out. So we can add, basically we're pulling public safety out of policing and public safety out of core services, which is fine. Happy to do it.
You might want to add the EMS in there as well, but I guess that would be public safety. We're going to face this again, I'm sure. And I think we need to be ready for it on a number of levels, right? We had problems with elections, right? Trying to scramble to accommodate those sort of things. So I think all of that falls into public safety.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that included. And I'd also like to see some kind of exploration of diversity and inclusion and ways to make sure we are reaching not just our vulnerable populations, but our underserved populations.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Do you think that that would fit under cultural priorities? Should that be
I don't know, I'm feeling like cultural priorities is tangible, like buildings and landmarks. You see it differently, maybe.
It could be expanded. I mean, you know, you get to define these terms as you'd like. If it's cultural and diversity and cultural priorities, perhaps as a category.
Yeah, one of the things that I had written down on that that little sheet that you sent us, Rob, which I think was really helpful in narrowing things down and getting ideas on paper. You know, looking at our town and making sure that our town is employing people who look like our population here in town, making sure that you know, different populations are represented across the board as far as town employment goes.
It's not just employment. We need our boards and commissions. to
Yeah,
reflect our diverse
Yeah,
population, right? We don't see a whole lot of that. So wherever everybody thinks it fits in, I'd like to see some exploration of that topic.
Okay. I've got the concept, and I think we're still at the goals level. So I think we're at the right level for continuing down the list.
So it's interesting that cultural priorities caught my eye too. It talks about history and culture, but we don't recognize the Native American population that was here before us. And we, you know, while we're going to call out landmarks or whatever, we might want to strive to recognize that we're on land that belong to others. And do we have, you know, ways to do that? Like, I know there's the Great Swamp, you know, the trails and you know, that's not really a high focus. So thinking about where Native Americans and other people have contributed just to fully show our history. And I think that's missing. That's not in that objective. I actually Googled or Control F, and Native American or Indigenous people isn't in the goals and objectives, and that's part of our history. So
Yeah, it was definitely one of the issues I was thinking of as I was thinking about broadening it. So
yeah, but I do think we need probably to look at all of the policies and procedures that we have through a lens of inclusion, and are we just inadvertently excluding by the way we operate or the way that we inform people or the way that we, I don't know. So like it's beyond hiring and boards. It's everything that we do. Are we using the lens? Are we just using only one lens, and then we're only cultivating one group of people and reaching one group of people? So I do agree that we need to think about who we're not reaching and how we should do that. Just the example of the over 75, how many don't have a email address to find out that they could get the shot this weekend, or, how do we do that?
Right. So that is broader than cultural priorities. It's sort of gets at what's the vibe you'd like the town to have 10 years from now? What's it feel like to be a South Kingstown resident 10, 15 years from now? That's an interesting thing. I'm not sure how we encapsulate that, how we summarize that. Mm-hmm. It's about, am I right? I mean, it's about inclusion, feeling comfortable, everybody not being an outsider. It's something in that area, no?
I think if, I in working with like nonprofits, this would be sort of like a diversity and inclusion goal. So, I mean, I think that would be sort of the terminology, and it would probably be its own standalone goal. I mean, you could have cultural priorities even be a subset of diversity and inclusion.
Yep.
I don't know. Other thoughts?
Okay.
About like improving and revitalizing our core villages. I mean, I feel like that could kind of fit into many of these broad areas, but should we have that more explicit?
Yeah, it's sort of the core facilities, but not really. Land use and core facilities. It's not called out. The objectives do speak to, the existing objectives do speak to the villages, but they're not called out as a long-term goal. They're called out as sort of things we want to do over the short run, which may actually, you know, destine us to failure, because you can't do what I think you're contemplating, which is maintain a vibrant collection on a sort of day-to-day, week-to-week basis. There's got to be a long-term strategy, not just daily tactics. So I think there's something there, Rory, and I don't know what it is. But it's pulling out that core facilities and land use thing.
So many of these goals are intertwined, right? So I don't know, I feel woefully inadequate in my knowledge of a lot of the issues. I'd like to see us reach out to the departments and the boards and commissions and say to them, here's what we have in place. Take a look at it and tell us what you think about this. We're the experts that we can tap into could give us advice, because I'm not qualified to talk about transportation and traffic safety objectives.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not, but we have people who are. So I'd really like to see us tap into those resources.
So I think there's truth in that, Deb, but I also think that you are absolutely qualified by virtue of your institutional position to have an opinion about what the community should be looking like and feeling like with regard to traffic safety and transportation 10 years out.
Right. The goals are one thing, but the objectives to achieve those goals are an entirely different skill set.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them are not, but a lot, some of these are technical.
Yeah.
Right?
So with the transportation part, could we have talked a lot about the fact that Champaign Heights is not on the bus route. It's, you know, people are walking a half a mile with their groceries. Where do we put that objective to try to work with BRIPTA to try to modify the route? I mean, there's not even a shelter. So it's just like, how do we've all, I've heard everyone, I'm sure I'm not speaking for anyone, but I think I am. We've all heard it, and I think we could all agree on that. And so how do we incorporate that? Because it's 10 years of talk, but we really, that checks off a lot of boxes. People shouldn't be walking with groceries on that road to nowhere where they can, you know.
So I'm gonna try to keep us disciplined in the three concentric circle thing here and ask the question, are we done with our priorities? Are we okay with the list of priorities if we add diversity and inclusion and policing and public safety? If we add those items to this list, is the list a satisfactory list? No list is ever going to be perfect, but is it okay?
Fine. I think the police is excellent.
Okay. So then the next process is, and I'm going to skip through this because it's not flowing neatly. The next process is for us to sort of work through and define some goals with regard to each of these categories. And policing and diversity and inclusion may be the best place to start, since they're the newest ones and freshest in our minds. What would our 10-year goal be with regard to policing and public safety? In broad terms, I mean, this is the aspirational part of the exercise. What do we want for policing and public safety?
I think this is where I really agree with Deb Kelso. Like, we need to, it's not just about what we think it should look like. It's what do the members of the police department think that it needs to look like. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this part, I guess.
Everybody always has a hard time. This exercise is a miserable exercise. I've done this, I don't know how many times. It's always difficult. It's never easy. It's always hard to stay there was a phrase that someone used to describe the system in focus. It's always hard to maintain the level of focus, the right point in the system. This is the goals. This is the opinion about what should be. This isn't the technical stuff at this point. This is, what do we want? What do we wish policing were? What do we expect as a citizen or as citizens? What do we want our constituents to experience on a daily basis with regard to public safety? This is not we want, 10-minute response times necessarily. This could be, we want EMS services to be fast enough to avoid heart attacks. It's that kind of goal.
So I would say we need to have a conversation with the directors, whether it's the chief and the director of EMS, to really hear what they think. They're obviously aware of what, the trends are, and, what their aspirations are. Do we want to put more officers on bikes in the summer? Do we want to do, whatever to change things? We would have to hear from them. And the same thing with EMS, because that's their area.
Right. So yes, there's truth to that. But again, how you get to where you want to be is that conversation. We'd like to make sure that there's fast enough response time on EMS so that people aren't dying of heart attacks. We want fast, it's broad goals. And then we sit down with Craig and say, what do you need? And he's going to tell you he needs a Southern EMS station.
So I guess then for me, a goal as far as policing goes would be to increase training in mental health for members of the police department, and also to improve community relationships between members of the community and the police force.
Okay.
And then however, whatever objectives we decide on to get there, that would be my long-term goal.
So I came up with something rough, and that would be to have a public safety team that all residents feel protected by.
Yep.
I think
Our goal, how do we get there that all residents feel they are protected?
Yeah, I really like that wording.
And I want to recognize that the police force has been doing, police department has been doing a lot of work already. So a lot of continuation of what they are sort of doing. I mean, I feel like they're making real efforts to diversify the force, which is something I think we want to see continue.
I agree. I'm not just talking about police when I say that I think the elderly population wants to feel protected by the EMS folks, right? So we work towards that by putting the Southern Station in, by servicing 24/7. It's not just that, it's not just the police, it's all public safety.
Right.
And that encompasses traffic safety, right? I mean, if you're a pedestrian, you don't have a vehicle, you want to feel safe, public safety.
That and a ton of effort went into getting accreditation for the police department. So I think as a long-term goal, we want to maintain that accreditation.
And that was a good objective from the past that got came through.
Yeah, it's a continual process though. You gotta continue to update your policing policies, maintain that accreditation. So that's, long-term goal. We just want to maintain that level of service.
Are there any goals that the council has around fire service?
I know that, it'd be great to find some type of better resolution around Jerusalem. I don't know, that's more of an objective, I guess, working with Narragansett.
So I'm going to
Increasing-
sort of drill down a little bit and ask, is it the goal and objective of the town council, and should it be the goal and objective of the town to maintain its robust volunteer service? Because if we're going to commit to that, there are going to be things we need to do in the next couple, 3 years to help support a robust volunteer service. Recruitment is an increasing challenge. There are things like the Jerusalem solution, which would be, going to Narragansett and saying, look, your folks are basically getting a free ride. It's not a fair or appropriate way to fund fire service in that part of Narragansett. That reduces the property tax burden and sustains the program. Because if the property tax burden isn't, sustainable or isn't constrained, it threatens the program. Recruitment is the number one threat. Finance is another possible danger to that service. The radio system contribution that we're making and the maintenance of that system at essentially town expense for the benefit of the districts and all other public safety is a strategy that's been devised on the assumption that we're looking to maintain a robust volunteer service. Is that a correct thing? Do we want to say we are looking to maintain the robust volunteer service?
I am looking to maintain that.
Yeah, I am as well.
I mean, we've had cost estimates of what it
Yeah,
would.
it's not cheap.
Yeah, 5 million, I think.
Yeah, about 5 or 6 million a year.
Right. So I am most definitely in favor of continuing our relationship with the fire districts.
Any thoughts on coordination in an environment that has multiple public safety entities then? Because we have 2 volunteer fire companies. We have the University of Rhode Island Police. We have the Emergency Medical Services of the University of Rhode Island. We have our EMS and we have our police department. Forget, mutual aid with other neighboring towns. Just in town, we have all of those separate entities. Thoughts about coordination and partnershiping? How's that for a buzzwordy kind of word? Partnershiping.
I think that's good. I think honestly that fire districts do a pretty good job of communicating with one another and with the town. And we want to see that continue. Obviously we should have language in there about looking for ways to economize by sharing resources among all of us. But that's sort of what we're doing with the communications angle.
Yep.
So we just, I think we need to, say that we're committed to that.
Okay. All right. I got enough for a write-up on that one. How about diversity and inclusion? Is this within or separate from or superseding cultural priorities?
I don't think it's part, if we're going to look at cultural priorities as tangibles, buildings,
Okay.
landmarks.
Yep.
Then this is not that.
Okay.
This is something totally different. Maybe we need to expand that heading.
I don't mind going to 14 on a list. I think that's fine. What do we have for diversity and inclusion goals in the long run? What do we think this looks like in South Kingstown in a decade? What is a diverse and inclusive town feel like 10 years out?
I think it certainly recognizes the whole history of the land that we inhabit here. So we need to do objectives around recognizing indigenous history, the history of slavery and exploitation in the town. I think it also goes to what other folks have said about encouraging diversity in terms of recruitment to town staff. And that should extend to, as we work with places like the fire districts, trying to diversify, our volunteer forces and our volunteer boards. So I think that that's a piece of that.
And maybe working with the school department to help however we can help, or coordinate with them to start to rectify the inequitable outcomes of students. How can we help the schools achieve the same goal at this, along with us, next to us?
Okay. I'm going to come back to that when we get to the objectives, because it sounds like a very concrete action we can take in the next year or two. That's good. Other elements in the broadest sense of diversity and inclusion?
So I would just like to see us in 15 years not have to have a group in town that calls themselves TASK, right? Toward an anti-racist South Kingstown. I'd like to see the group not have to be formed, right? Because it speaks to a problem that we haven't addressed, that needs to be addressed.
We want a goal that specifically calls out racism and says it is our goal to have a society, have a town that is not.
Yes, it is. So my goal in 15 years would be, to not have to have that, to not have to have the goal anymore.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm interested in, sort of exploring what best practices might be around other municipalities, what they've done. Earlier, I guess it was last year now, there was the first, I think, gay pride parade in town. It was just a car parade, not to say just a car, but it was a car parade. But are there ways that we can celebrate diversity and really highlight the inclusion in town?
Yep. Again, very actionable. We can do that. All right, I think we've got enough to work with. So now we can go to our pre-existing list. Long-term goals about budget and financial fiscal management and taxation. Thoughts on this? I mean, this really can be, we want everyone to be taxed fairly. We want everyone to know what the budget processes are and be able to find out what's being done with their money. They can be very broad goals.
I don't see much room for improvement in what we have already identified. I think our goals as they currently stand are pretty encompassing. I would have some suggestions for objectives, but I don't know. I think the goals as they stand, if you read them, are pretty inclusive.
It's one of our strengths, institutionally, very, very deep. All right, moving on then. Core services and facilities, aside from policing and public safety, which we're going to pull out, what other core services, objectives do we have sort of in the short run, but more importantly, again, what do we want those core services to look like in the long run, 10 years out? What do we want for the recreation department? What do we want? What are our core services? Let me back up and start there. What do we think the core services of the town are?
So something that I've noticed, especially since COVID, there is a lack of school-age childcare. I've not been able to get it for my child this year, and I know that that's different with COVID, but I think that we should look at, bolstering options for parents before and after school.
Okay, so that is it's a perfectly legitimate take, but it's a different take than we've had historically on our core services goals. And I'm not critiquing it. I think it's just worth noting. We've always focused on the things the town government does as a government. This is different, and this, what you're saying is we as a town need to encourage, private service providers, or step in if there is no way for private service providers to provide a core service. A core service is childcare. Clearly, I mean, we need, somebody, if we're going to have an economy that requires both parents to be out of the home to work, we're going to need child services, daycare services. So that's a different bent, and I'm fine with it. But what do we think the core services of town are?
So just following up on what Jess said, maybe the way that childcare can play into town services is through the Parks and Rec department. They are.
Well, we do have a daycare program. We actually have Stone, which is one of our programs through the rec center, or through the rec program.
So how do we maybe
I think
expand?
that's only preschool, Rob. I think I'm more talking about.
I'm sorry, you're right. You're correct.
Jess, are you talking about elementary school?
Elementary and middle, yes.
Okay, so we have services in town, like the Y has that kind of a program, right? And
Yeah, it's very hard to get into.
yeah, so we need more.
Right. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Big.
Yes. Yes.
And that might be part of our economic structure, right? Because that speaks totally to economics. If you don't have childcare, you can't go to work.
Okay.
So economic structure, part of our goals would be to expand, those
Promote,
kind of
encourage,
Yes.
give free rent, subsidize rent, do, any number of things you could do.
Right. And as our population ages, we're looking at this on both ends of the spectrum. This
Adult
young-
daycare.
You're right. And the expansion of that as well. I know we're looking at Cornerstone at the moment to expand services, which is a good thing. But that speaks to our economic health, is if people can go to work.
Okay.
So core services I'm looking at as building inspection and water and road, public works, those kinds of things. I would think those are our core services.
But I think that this is actually a helpful conversation. You're probably right that it ends up, or big chunks of it anyway, end up in the economic structure area. But what else is out there that we think is core that we don't have, that we want more of? What do we want the economy to produce that it doesn't currently produce? What core services to a community do we not have? We're good on medical for the most part, right? I'd say we're pretty strong on medical services.
And banking.
We've got banking. What don't we have that we need more of? What core services? What do you have to go to Narragansett or Woonsocket for? Wherever.
An agricultural supplies store.
Okay.
Drive all over the state to get my chickens taken care of. I know other people do too.
Interesting.
I mean, so one thing, growing up here, co-ops I felt had such a bigger presence with the alternative food co-op and being able to buy in bulk, and then like the childcare cooperatives that were around locally. And I wonder if Parks and Rec can help foster cooperatives like that to succeed again, if that would be something we could do through core services. I don't know.
And we actually have weak retail, right? So you can't, I mean, you can't buy a pair of shoes. You can go buy a pair of sneakers, but you can't buy a pair of shoes in South Kingstown
Or a tie.
or a tie.
I had to go to North Kingstown to buy undershirts for my
Right.
child the other day. Yeah,
And
we don't.
We have weak retail.
Okay. All right, so I think that's a useful sort of diversion, but
But do we, do we really want the type of retail that means? So do you want like a big box store? Because I feel like that's not the vibe of South Kingstown to have that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Right. No, I'm not looking for the big box store, but when we, I mean, I've lived here long enough to remember when the shoe stores were on Main Street, right?
Right.
We've had them. We've had small department stores. We've had Woolworths. We've had Riches, whatever, up in the Wakefield Mall. There were a number of retailers that circled through there, right? And obviously they left because they couldn't make it. But so what is it about our retail that we can't sustain that Kenyans couldn't survive? What is it? What can we do as a council to try to encourage that sort of small retail business health?
all right, I'm going to ask that we put a pin in this until we get to economics and come back to core municipal services, core government services. What do we think the core services of the municipal government are?
I mean, I think Deb listed them off well before, sanitation, water treatment, what else can you say? Public works, the library services, I think, are included here probably, or maybe those are.
Parks and Recreation.
I think of everything that happens in town hall. It only happens if you can get there between 8:30 and 4:30. So what has COVID taught us about how we can be more inclusive in time and, offering different times, or, not that we want to do Saturdays or evenings, but we don't have any of that. So you can't conduct town business. You can only conduct town business during the 8:30 to 4:30 window. And if you're someone who can't do that, then how do you how do we do that? Maybe there's lunchtime zoomed into the town clerk's office. Who knows? I mean, who knows? But like thinking about expanding how the services of the town reach the community.
Yep. So let's state it as a goal. Is it our goal as a town to have services that are available, core services available to the public at convenient times, or 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Do we want to go to an environment, a digital environment, where every service is available online 10 years from now?
Well, some things you probably want that.
Yeah, one thing to note is that although many of the town activities sort of end at the close of business, much of the policy making, which involves staff work, is happening in the evenings
Right.
at town. So folks need to have time to be able to do both of those.
I think convenient hours, though, and a government that is available to the people when they need it is availability, and hours are an important thing. I don't know what we'll make of that, but I can work with it.
Just maybe trying to investigate what services could be put online that would be routine, like a dog license or.
Right. I agree with you completely on the objective, the actions that we can take in the next couple of years, investigation, report. I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to express the goal. The goal is to make sure that it's convenient for the public. So,
look for ways to expand services to meet the needs of the public in a 24/7 operation, something like that.
yeah.
It's just going to make it like accessible.
Yep. Accessible and convenient. I get it. In fact, maybe that's it. Maybe we want core services to be accessible and convenient to the public. That may be the goal. That may be it right there. Okay. All right. Are we ready to move on to civic engagement, public participation?
So we've learned a lot about this in the past year. So I think the goal would be to maintain the public participation part of it, right? So I don't want to go back to town hall where on a night like this, somebody has to get dressed and go out. So the goal would be to maintain the level of public participation or the access the public has to participate that we're currently enjoying.
Yep. So it's sort of leveraging technology to support convenient and accessible policymaking. Yep.
Civic engagement is another whole topic because, again, we're going to speak to outreach and ways to engage the public, which is hard.
So we did hear about the new app. So maybe that is one of the things, we can use to provide better notices to the, it only is going to reach whoever puts the app on their smartphone. But I think interacting, there has to be a way to improve the way that public is informed about things and finds just gets the notices. It shouldn't be that you have to find them.
Yep. Yeah, the app is still being beta tested. Lori Fox and I have been trying to break it for the last couple of weeks, and unfortunately, we keep succeeding. But we're anticipating rollout probably next week to the public. What do we want civic engagement to be like in South Kingstown? This has actually been something I've spent a lot of time thinking about in the last several months. I'm worried about the state of civic engagement in the country. I'm worried about the state of civic engagement locally. Alex de Tocqueville, when he did his tour in the early 1800s of the United States, he said, the thing that was most striking about Americans were they were always willing to lend a hand to one another. They were willing to engage each other in positive ways. It was the volunteerism and it was the community cooperative spirit that struck him as so unique and so empowering in the United States. We're not there. We're not doing that much anymore. And government, may not be the way to solve that problem entirely, but we have historically been, local governments in particular, have historically been important actors, facilitators in that ecosystem. What we've just talked about tonight, maintaining a robust and doing whatever it takes to maintain a robust fire service, volunteer fire service, is a big deal. That is a decision that changes the way volunteers will be dealt with by the town, or it potentially changes it. It says we're gonna, if we need to help with recruitment, we're gonna come up with ideas to do that. It's a supportive role. We need to support good civic stuff. And it's not clear to me that in the United States, we're doing that as much as we used to. And I can't speak to the specifics here in South Kingstown. I haven't been around long enough to know whether, the department heads used to be the Little League coaches or not, but there's something there that needs to be paid some attention to.
volunteerism is part of this, right? Civic
Yes.
engagement. You engage with your community in a number of ways, and you could be an employee, but the majority of people are volunteer on some level, even if it's just to lend their opinion to an issue. Civic engagement, I think, is very hard. It's a hard concept and even harder to, I don't know, promote. So I think the putting of groups together, diverse groups. So we bring the kindergartners to the scallop shell for trick or treat. It brings the two divergent populations together so they know each other better. And I think we as a town need to find a way to do that, to bring the different groups together for the conversation.
Yeah.
Bringing the Economic Development Committee with the Sustainability Committee, right? To have the conversation, to know the issues better.
So I think that's really important what you're saying there, Deb. I think that one of the most amazing things about South Kingstown's ecosystem in this area is the fact that you have so many volunteers on boards and committees. You got 25 or 26 active boards and committees, and you've got, you know, half a dozen to a dozen members of each of those. That's an extraordinary number of people who are willing, and they actually show up, and they show up having read the packets, and they show up engaged. I mean, that really is one of the strongest community engagement things I've ever seen. It really, South Kingstown is really quite unique and extraordinary in that regard.
And very fortunate we have the level of expertise. You know, a lot of very, very knowledgeable people are on those boards, and it's impressive. So I don't know, I think a goal for me for civic engagement would try to bring the different boards and community groups together for whatever, a conversation about whatever we choose. But once Zoom is awkward. I think we'd be better once we get past this phase and can see each other in person, because it becomes I don't know, hard to get to know someone when you're looking at them through a video screen.
One thing that I want to throw out there around this is, you know, we have the tercentenary coming up, 300-year anniversary of the town. And it's great to have a big project, I think, to get people rallied around and sort of focus civic engagement on something like that.
Great
you know,
idea.
Do we want, you know, think big, you know, do we?
Yeah, love it. Great idea.
We also probably need to have regular meetings with all the boards and commissions, not just once in a while, or, you know, because then you get these hour-long presentations when we probably would do better in 15-minute catch-ups. So if we had more regular meetings with all the boards and commissions, I think that would really help. That would, and I do like Abel's idea about the working together on a big project, because I think that's when you really see the best part of South Kingstown. And people all say, like, it's your village. Your village is going to come and give you the casserole when you're sick, or, you know, walk your dog because you have a knee injury, whatever it is. I mean, people have come together in tragedy in this town in many, many ways. And so that's, I think, the big projects are where we feel like it's the SK Village.
Okay. We've sort of tackled some objectives there too, and that's good. All right, education and training. This one is one that in our current objectives is relatively shallow. There's not much there. It's improve or maintain good communication with the school committee and figure out what to do with a declining, you know, in response to a declining student population. Are there other things, and I can go to the things that were talked about in the joint work session with the school committee, or I can, you know, just leave it on this slide and sort of hear from you without the benefit of going back to that previous meeting.
I think it would be great to talk more about continuing education for, folks who are beyond school age. We have the education exchange in town running, programs to help, increase the workforce and local industries. How can we grow sort of that?
So I think we could grow through the guild, right? So the guild will teach me how to embroider or how to, play volleyball. But I think we could expand our opportunities there into civics, into municipal finance, into a whole number of things, right? We could fund those programs through existing, facilities. We don't need a lot of infrastructure. We need an instructor and a course, right? So maybe we could look to Parks and Rec to say, how about we expand the offerings? Not so much, recreation anymore, but knowledge.
So am I being too melodramatic if I summarize that as we want to be a community of lifelong learners? Or we want to be a
That's a
community?
great goal.
Yep, okay.
Or something more like we're providing learning opportunities for every stage of the lifespan, so that it's, so that the learning is birth to senior as opposed to, I don't know, the other way. Because lifelong learner, that doesn't meet people where they're at. That's just your kind of learning on your own.
Okay. All right. How about training? What are your thoughts on training for the town workforce? This is a whole new category that we've not dealt with in our previous goals and objectives. And maybe there's not a lot to be done here in terms of goals. But I would suggest, that I want to be part of an organization where everyone has the opportunity to learn everything they need to learn to be the best at their job they can be. And I'd like to see a town that encourages people to grow in their positions through training, through going out and learning things that are relevant to what they do on the day job, and helping them, grow as people. I think that when we nurture people's instincts to expand their knowledge and become engrossed in something exciting, we get better, more engaged employees.
So I would agree with that. I think the goal would then be to ensure that any employee has the ability to achieve, right, through outside training or experiences, right?
Mhm.
Funded, which would be town funded, right? So we'd set a budget figure for that kind of training and make that available.
There's a lot that can be done without funding. Just knowing that this is an important objective, that we think this is important, sends a message to supervisors and managers and department heads saying, look, we want you to look for opportunities to train. Now, some of that's online and free, and some of that's in a classroom and costs money. Let's budget accordingly.
So one of the things that we've sort of switched a little bit at URI is that we don't do it. Well, the philosophy is to not do as many conferences, but to bring people in, because really to bring,
Yep.
you can train unlimited people for the price that you could send someone to a 4-day conference. So we kind of flipped that so that, and I don't know if there's any concerns about training people, staff education unrelated to their job, if that's an issue, but we did flip it the other way. So we bring in people to us, and then hundreds of people can participate.
Right. Good. I can work with that. The land use and housing categories, I'd suggest really are conversation that we're going to have on Wednesday night. Unless the council feels otherwise, I'd suggest we skip to, and in fact, sustainability and natural resources with the Conservation Commission will also be touched upon to some extent. But maybe we could do land use and housing on Wednesday. That's a natural place for those goals and objectives to be identified. Sustainability and natural resources probably not going to be as much of the focus on Wednesday, but it'll be tangential.
So I just wasn't sure that, I just wanted to say, ask if we could talk a little bit about land use, because the agenda on Wednesday might be sort of limited to only certain items. So there might be some things that we wanted to talk about related to land use now.
Okay. Sure. So what's our goal?
So I guess the comp plan, is 4 years in the gray zone. How can we, bring that forward? And then I think as soon as it's out, people have said they want to work on the next iteration. I think that's what I heard in planning meetings. Planning board meetings.
Yep.
So the comprehensive plan is one.
So what's the goal around the comprehensive plan?
To have it meet to have it meet our needs, because it already doesn't fit for what they need it to do right now, the one that they're adopting.
Right. So let's step back. I think that the comprehensive plan is a way that you achieve, it's a roadmap to achieving the community's goals with regard to land use. It's sort of a roadmap to the future. That's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a plan that gets us to the kind of build out and conservation that we're looking for. Having the comp plan written and circulated and discussed are objectives to achieve the goal of getting to what's in the plan. Is there anything in the land use category, this priority area, that we should be calling out in our goals and objectives that isn't just an operational thing? When I talk about this, it has struck me that South Kingstown has clearly got the goal of preserving its night sky, has the goal of preserving the last forest that touches the sea in the Northeast Corridor. There's no place where the sky is dark from southern Maine, from Portland, Maine to the Delmarva Peninsula, except for Charlestown and Matunic. It's the only place on the eastern seaboard where you can see the darkness of the land right up against the darkness of the sea. That's a manifestation of a policy choice. The goal was to preserve land. If that's still the goal, then I think we're in pretty good stay with what we've got in our current goals and objectives. If that needs to be shifted, we need to figure out what the description of that shift is.
So I think that we need to sort of reevaluate how land is used and how much land is being preserved and where we can shift things to make room for more affordable housing. That makes sense.
Yep.
So yeah, I do think a lot of those conversations are going to be happening on Wednesday for sure. What are you looking? So I don't know. One thing I would put under these sort of categories would be coastal access and encouraging that as a goal. I'm not sure if that's going to come up anywhere else or how prominent it is.
Currently. So how would you say it, Abel? To encourage, to promote, to maximize?
And even preserve, because I think coastal access is threatened around the country. So yeah, preserve, expand, and recognize, I know we already recognize the assets that our, coastline and our ponds and wetlands make to the community. But, preserving coastal access, expanding it where possible.
Oh, so that's good. And I'm not being cute here. What do we mean by access? I'm probing with that. I mean, I'm really.
I would say for a variety of uses, recreational, but also obviously there's aquaculture ongoing in the ponds and fishing. So surfing, swimming. So yeah, I mean, I think we need to talk about giving everybody, not infringing on the rights of one group by expanding it just for another.
And sort of preserving, maximizing, encouraging has land use or land size implications as we're dealing with the parking down on Green Hill Beach Road now. So are there land side goals associated with this?
I mean, I think there have to be in terms, so much of water quality is dependent on the land use right around the water. You can see that in Green Hill Pond. So yeah, I mean, that's why I guess this all is part of a whole discussion around natural resources in general.
Yep. Okay.
I think it's about making sure that each village has some access to open space, like so Peacedale has the village green and, there's a park in West Kingston, like recognizing that there's attractive, healthy spaces for each area to that's more accessible. So like what's really in Kingston for open space? Nothing that I can think of.
Yeah, other than the university campus.
Right, just the quad. So
Right.
people do walk the university on the weekends and all that. It's just thinking more like what's accessible to each little village community, having a little pod of all of the things we want to have. So, and then just also to recognize that wanting all those things puts demands on sewer, water, whatever. And are we prepared if we add density in those little villages? Are we prepared for that?
I think really focusing to make sure that everybody, that we're ensuring that there's equitable open space for everybody.
And water. I want to just put water in there, like clean water for everyone is a big issue, clean air, and open space goes along with that, of course.
But so the reason I know we've drifted away a bit from the comp plan, but something was said in one of the planning board meetings that the fact that we don't have an adopted comprehensive plan, it looks, I don't know, I'm going to just use layman's term. I don't know if I misunderstood, looks bad if things go to the affordable SHAB thing, like, because we don't have that. And it's an ordinance that we are now behind on. The fact that we don't have an active one is problematic. Is that correct? Am I misunderstanding it?
Well, we would go to SHAB anyway. The comp plan doesn't trigger appeals to SHAB, but it's not good. We should have our comprehensive plan completed. And it is complete. In fact, it's been approved by the planning board. It's ready to come to the council as soon as the staff completes the edits, which is just a painstaking exercise.
Yeah, but I feel like I heard that years ago. That was the same thing. That's all the graphics that need. So I thought that, if I just have heard the same thing about it's just the graphics. And so
this isn't graphics anymore. My understanding is we're down to textual modifications, textual changes.
I'm just trying to not have it be, not having a comprehensive plan that's adopted be a detriment to projects, either for, the planning board or for the developer.
The only place we really get into difficulty is when the state wants to do a project. That's the only time when a developer gets to sort of do what he wants because you don't have the comp plan. The state is bound to regard and respect a comprehensive plan that's been adopted by a town. If there is none, it doesn't have to. So the state can construct without regard to a review of that comprehensive plan because it's out of date. But it doesn't, the comprehensive plan doesn't dictate what developers generally, private sector developers do. It is not a law. It's just a document that describes the objectives of the community. And what the planning board does when they use the comprehensive plan is they find whether or not a proposal made by a developer is consistent with, and that's a very broad and flexible concept, consistent with. But the state can literally do something without regard to any local planning input if we don't have a comprehensive plan. That's where the exposure is.
So just realistically, what do you think's the timeline for this to come before the council?
So I was told the middle of February. Is Jamie on?
Someone from planning is.
Yeah, so let's bring the planning, whoever's in from planning, they'll know the answer. Susan, I imagine that it's Jamie Rabbit, who is the planning department on the thing.
Planning is being brought in now.
That's great, thank you. So have we got Jamie? While we're waiting,
We have someone. I'm not sure who it is. I will ask.
we have
them
from the
to
planning
unmute.
department.
Rob, it's me.
Hey, Jamie, how are you? So when are you gonna
Hi.
get the darn plan done?
Jamie, I don't.
I'm listening to some great conversation tonight.
So when do we expect the comprehensive plan to hit the council's desks?
Within the next, hopefully 2 to 3 weeks. Rob, to answer the questions that I heard regarding, we're literally down to edits. There's no big changes to graphics. It's just going through and making sure pagination, the figure numbers align, table of contents. We're really going through it with a fine tooth comb right now in between our current workload. So I anticipate if nothing changes workload in the next couple of weeks that I'm trying to wrap it up.
Would it be possible to set a deadline on this? I feel this is really important going forward, and we got to get this
So
under our belts here.
the only danger, and I'll let Jamie answer, but before he does, I want him to know that I recognize, and we need to recognize, the only danger is we cannot have him push work that has a statutory clock running. So if we've got an application that's come in and they will get an approval unless it is treated by the planning board, we need to deal with that time schedule. Some applications have a state imposed deadline. And if we don't take action, the action that the developer wants automatically happens. We do not want automatic approvals. So Jamie, I'm sorry, I'll let you answer within that context. Know that we can't and really we're not asking you to.
No, that. Rob's absolutely right. We've had two projects that have taken some time to shepherd them through the process, and that's Curtis Corner Road, which was done on special meeting nights with regards to the public hearings, as well as Matunic Beach condos, which again is special meetings, additional evening out in the preparation for those additional meetings. I literally, the last week, I asked my staff in essence that I'm going to hibernate in my office, either in SK or virtually, to try and make edits to the document. And I've been successful to try and block away time to do that. But there's always the emails, the phone calls, and the permitting aspects to handle. Again, I see it as a priority, and I'm trying to manage workload to get that done. But again, I'm relatively confident that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'll be able to put a staple in the final draft and shepherd that along to council. The planning board has already approved it, minus those final edits.
So Robbie, is there anyone in town hall that is able to help with this? Obviously, everybody is working.
Yeah.
You know, everything's different with COVID and the overwork in general, but is there some way that we can get Jamie some help to make sure that this is done in a timely fashion?
It's the kind of document that some familiarity with the document and with the content of the document is very helpful. I wouldn't want to give this to someone who hasn't ever seen a comprehensive plan before. It's possible. I mean, yes, if you're just checking figure numbers, but if the figure number is wrong and you don't recognize that it's wrong because it seems to be the thing, you know, you could end up with the kind of problem that they're trying to avoid. So let's, I mean, I don't know, I'm gonna, per capita income figure 4, you know, that this person doesn't know what per capita is, we're in trouble. You know, it's going to be very technical references in the figures.
I just want to, Jamie, I know you're new. You inherited this project, and I appreciate that you're going to bring it right over the finish line.
Thank you.
I totally get that. It's just a long time coming, and I know that people are anxious, you know, to have this move forward. And then I was in a planning meeting that they're saying they already want to make changes again. So I think it was said, we're going to adopt this. You know, it is an ordinance we have a public hearing for, so we're going to adopt it. And then people want to dive back in and start tweaking again. That's what I heard maybe 3 months ago at a meeting. I thought maybe I was wrong. So I appreciate.
Yeah, no, there's no Yeah, Deb, there's no near-term plan to dive right back into the plan of conservation and development. I think in the capital improvement program, you've seen that I've made requests gearing up so that you don't lose sight of it in year 3, 4 from now. But I would not anticipate revisiting the comprehensive community plan in the next 12 to 18 months. So I'm not aware of any intent by the planning board to, you know, put a staple in it and immediately go right back to it. And again, I do appreciate your sentiments about inheriting the plan, but I've had Brian Wagner and Jay Parker and myself all went through. We have the marked up copy. And again, it's finding those days and that time in the day to get those done. And I've tried to move it up in the priority list, and it'll go even higher than it has been.
So Jamie,
I hear you, and I heard the community also.
And I know that I've been in the special planning board meetings, and they're long and they're technical, and it's very involved. So I feel the workload from you because I've been in that meeting till 11 plus. So I know what's going on. I think
But Deb, try and answer the one.
What?
Asking for help. Amy Reiner has asked if I need any assistance with the software, that she would lend a hand with that. And again, there are a couple graphic issues about moving a graphic that I will reach out to her. But to Rob's point, there are some sections that I found where you're reading a paragraph and then there's 5 tables and then a sentence ends. So someone wouldn't recognize that or make that edit. I'm trying to move a sentence ahead 5 pages and then having to modify some of the tables and figures so that they all line up again. And in essence, in some instances, shortening a paragraph so that all of that works without losing the sense and what that paragraph is articulating. But again, I'm relatively confident that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we would have this wrapped up.
So Jamie, just to Jess's point, is there anything that we can do that we need to do? Is there anything that you don't have that you need from us? Or is there any assistance, anything we can do to expedite and make sure that we're not going to miss that 3-week deadline or that 3-week target?
Ask that no one submits an application to the planning department in the next 2 weeks.
And we're not doing that.
and Jess, but yeah, we can't do that. So I have the assets and the resources available to me. Again, it's trying to manage the workload. And again, I will put the time in to try and make that 2 to 3 weeks happen. Yeah.
Rob, I'm just going to share in this as well. I would expect this to get done, 3 weeks from today. I think that's plenty of time. You got the competency, you got the resources, you got the capability. Understanding the graphics and language should be fine. I agree with Deb Bergner. I've heard this graphics thing for too long. This comprehensive plan is important. Let's get this done. 3 weeks from now is plenty of time. I think we should set a hard deadline.
All right. So I hereby set a hard deadline. Jamie, you got 3 weeks.
Okay.
I guess you're not going to watch the Super Bowl,
Understood.
Jamie. I'm just joking. Watch the Super Bowl.
Can I at least have that day off?
You can have that. You can have that day off.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Anything else on land use?
Just a procedural or whatever question. So there's a number of things that have already happened. So would you take those things,
Yes.
Oh,
Those
yeah.
come out.
So you're going to edit those out?
Yes.
Okay. Because
Everything that's been achieved comes out, which is sort of weird, kind of nice.
yeah,
Drag them
because
all.
it was in core services, the opening of the rec center in 2017.
Right.
So clearly you're going to
We've
cross
done
that
that.
off.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Anything in housing that we need to touch on tonight? All right, what about sustainability and natural resources?
This is where we were, I think, when we got into the discussion about the comprehensive plan. I know that we made reference to, sort of being step ahead or, at least at a bare minimum in line with state policies regarding, climate goals and resilience goals. So I think that those are, still good goals to have.
So do we want to take out that the last goal, it says promote and establish blah, blah, blah by 2025. That's 4 years away. I don't know where we are. And even it was created, in 2016, I guess, or this is 2018's goals,
Yes.
but it seems like that's a really short turnaround to actually promote and encourage the establishment of locally sourced renewable energy sources, such that by 2025, the production of such resources exceeds the annual energy use requirements of the South Kingstown municipal government.
Actually, we've come to achieve.
You think we're there?
Yeah. Is John Schock in the audience?
We don't need to go into this level.
Yeah, that's
We're
fine.
gonna-
But yes, I'll
We're
tweak
there,
that
yeah.
one. It's also not ideal form for us to have a date on a goal. Goals should not have dates, objectives have dates, but I'll tweak that one. All right. Cultural priorities?
And I think this, one objective that we could have, which we brought up earlier, is like at least some places where we recognize the indigenous history, in some of our municipal parks or whatnot, to recognize the history of the land before it was colonized.
That was a good way to summarize my idea. Thank you, April. I like it.
Good.
We work in land acknowledgements to all town ceremonies, or
That can be an objective as well, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll work with you on that. I hesitate, Jess, because land acknowledgements are potentially legally consequential, and we've seen the legal consequences of too overt an acknowledgement of property rights. We have to be careful. There's a really important cultural element to acknowledging that there were people here 10,000 years ago. There's a legal consequence of potential legal consequences for acknowledging a prior legal right to ownership. So we just have to be careful about how we do these things. We've had federally recognized tribes and other non-federally recognized tribes stake claims in courts that have cost private citizens lots and lots of money to defend because of actions that were land acknowledgements, the wrong type of acknowledgement.
I think it's important, and I think that we've heard from the community and groups such as Task that we find a way to do that appropriately.
Appropriately, I agree. Absolutely. Economic structure. What do we want the economy to do, produce, have? Now, we've got the prior discussion that I've got the notes on related to retail and essential services such as childcare, and there was one other. What else is there that that we would like to see the economy produce?
I'd just like to take one step back to cultural priorities, and maybe it even sort of ties into economic structure. One thing, that's great about the town is, all of the historic buildings that were sort of given to the town, and the properties that go along with them. The hazards were teetotalers, and my understanding from Rob is that the provisions whereby the town agreed to have all these be dry facilities into perpetuity aren't legally binding. So we've had the waves come to the town and ask for the ability to have alcohol sales at Old Mountain Field, for instance. And we've always just said, no, it's not allowed. If that's not the case, do we want to consider the possibility of making that available? And I know that that's a very niche concern, but it's something that we've, has been raised, and we've always thought it's not a possibility. We want to look into whether it is a possibility.
Yeah, I haven't gotten a definitive answer. I haven't asked for one from Mike Ursilla's office on the alcohol sales, but the general rule is that the state legislature voided all restrictive covenants that were older than 1952, that were done prior to, I think it was 1952. So a restrictive covenant that says you get to have and hold and keep unless you serve a cup of beer is likely voided. And we've just never had that conversation. We've never done the legal research because the policy has been to honor the teetotalers' wishes. So that is a thing that could be looked into.
I don't know. Maybe I'm unusual, but I think we should honor the gift. I mean, the intention of the gift was a certain way, and I feel like I don't know, the donation of whatever the land or the thing to honor that it's not so difficult to do. I don't know. I just feel like the spirit of the gift is discarded.
Yeah. There's a famous line from Thomas Jefferson talking about these sorts of restrictive covenants. He said, the world belongs in usufruct, in trust to the living. The dead have no claim against it. And this is a very old discussion, a very old conflict in American law and philosophy. To what extent do you let future generations decide their future, and to what extent do you allow those who had control over something a long time ago continue to exercise that control from the grave? It's a very old discussion.
Is there a list somewhere of what properties have restrictions on them?
Yes.
I'd love to see that. You know, I think about this a little bit differently. So if we wanted to rent the Village Green to a fundraising group, right? And they were going to sell beer and wine, right? And have a concert. I don't have a problem with that, but I would like to know, is it the Village Green? Is it, you know, how many properties do have restrictions on them because they were gifts? And what are those restrictions?
Yeah, we can get you guys a list of those. It may not be comprehensive, but I think we've got a comprehensive list that's readily available. I can tell you, you know, off the top of my head, it's the high school, it's the Hazard Building, it's Matunic School, it's Wakefield School, it's Old Mountain Field, it's Town Hall. I don't know about the Village Green.
Yeah, I'd like to see the list of properties and what restrictions there are.
Yep.
Probably the beach and things like that. No?
Maybe, I don't know.
Purchased. Was the beach purchased? The beach was purchased.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get that list together for you.
I'd love to see the list.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know how the discarding of restrictions. I wonder, you know, why would anyone donate their land or donate their development rights to the property, knowing that you could just change it? I don't know. I hear what you're saying about whatever that legal term is, hand from the grave. It's that legal thing, but I don't know, like what would be the incentive for somebody to donate a piece of property to the town and say, use it in this way or keep it in this way when it can be discarded?
It did take an act of the state legislature to discard these, and it's not all restrictions that have been discarded. If we enter into an agreement with someone today, it would be active because it wasn't in the relevant period of time that the legislation speaks to. But you're right. I mean, someday in the future, things will change.
Yeah, I just feel like by saying you can donate anything you want and whatever, why would you ever do that? Because we're going to use it for as we see fit when this time runs out.
For the tax donation or the tax deduction for, you know, the goodwill that you get immediately after your demise, because it's a legacy for your children for as long as it lasts. There's lots of reasons for doing it still. I mean, and maybe some people would choose not to donate if they can't decide whether or not wine and beer are going to be served, but others might. I mean, I don't know.
Right. I just think it's an interesting topic that, hasn't really been considered since, the advent of getting all those properties. So
Well, it can certainly be an objective to get a memorandum from legal counsel on all outstanding deed restrictions and the status of those restrictions and property owned by the town.
yeah.
All right, we ready for the economy?
That's good.
Do we want to be a bedroom community, a beach community, a university town, a tourist destination, or all of the above?
Yes.
I go with all the above.
Yep. Are there proportions? Are there relationships between those various things that we should tease out in our goals? Is there a way to be a beach town and a university town that's better than, I'm not going to say it.
I mean, I think when you brought up before, Rob, how, zoning is restricted around the university, so we can't really have incubator spaces for businesses that would partner well with like research that's ongoing at the university. I think that's an important piece of economic development in the town, potentially.
So what you're saying, though, is potentially a huge goal. If the town of South Kingstown sets as a goal to facilitate university-aligned businesses, that's a huge policy assertion. We've never made that assertion.
When we have URI as a whole priority in and of itself, you would think it might show up in the economic structure, though. So I think, it makes use of one of the great assets in the town, and it would probably draw in, people to live here, and it would, benefit the community to have them here.
I think too, to piggyback on that too, when you said to have people live here, what does our economy offer? What opportunities does our economy offer to retain those URI grads, where they will move here, stay here, and work in our community?
Yeah, Rob, I agree with Jess Rose and Abel Collins, and you with saying that policy assertion. I think that would be good for the town in the long term. I think we should establish that as a long-term goal.
It makes sense to me. I mean, I think that makes sense. Other things, what about the beach tourist stuff? Is there anything in that area where we should have some sort of policy goal? Is it preserving the beach areas and coastal spaces as they are? Is there change to be done? Do we want to rebuild a boardwalk? That kind of, what do we want it to feel like 10 years from now in the beach or on the beach in South Kingstown?
I think it's preserving the rural beach. I mean, we don't want to be Old Orchard Beach. We don't want to be Hampton Beach. We want it to be, I don't know, we like the pretty pictures of the beach that people, when they take their walks on Saturday, that's what I feel like is South Kingstown, like preserving that quality of the beach area.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know what you had said about bedroom community. It kind of slid by. Can you read back what you have or your notes?
do we want to be a bedroom community? Really just that. To what extent do we want to encourage people to think about South Kingstown as a viable, within the viable commuter shed for communities to the north, Providence, et cetera. We recently were talking to the folks on the statistical modeling committee, and one of the ideas that the committee was exploring, or a member of the committee was exploring, was the idea that the unavailability of affordable housing is what's driving the decline in our student population. And the conversation really, turned to, yes, but housing is unaffordable in Narragansett, and housing is unaffordable or unavailable because they don't construct it in Charlestown. What's our commuter shed? Where are people going if they're not coming here with their kids? And, if you're going to pursue a competitive bedroom community strategy, if you're going to get the folks who are moving out of Providence to the south to come here instead of Richmond, that's got to be a deliberate set of actions you take. You've got to decide you want to do that, and then you've got to decide how you're going to do that. So if we want to be a viable suburban bedroom community for folks who live and work north of here, we've got to decide we want to do it, and then again, how.
I guess I don't really like the bedroom community part. I feel like that's not a, I wouldn't use that descriptor, but
Okay.
I get the suburban, support to the happening in the central core, Providence, Warwick, whatever, but I don't like.
So we could call it a commuter. How big should I guess that's another way to ask the question, is how big a proportion of our residents should be commuters out of town? How many people should work at URI? I mean, I don't want to get too crazy about quantifying this, but in terms of a goal, we should have a goal for a mix. We want people to work local. We want people, because our policies will follow that objective. If we want to pursue a locally based workforce or encourage folks to commute into Providence, those are two one says we do everything we can with the rail line, and the other one says we do everything we can to subsidize local businesses. They're very different policy paths.
Do we know where we stand now? I feel like we are already largely a bedroom community.
Yeah, I think so.
We don't have business here.
Yes, that is the truth. Yes.
Now, do we want to try to reverse that? Is that the question you're asking, to modify the percentages? Is that what we're looking to, what you're asking?
Yeah,
I don't think we have the land use to do that, right? So we're not going to build the big box store or the big box office complex.
Well, so there's lots of ways to encourage this to be reversed. And some of it's going to happen naturally. And, economic development's a really, really big problem, because there's 50, 60, 70 years of evidence that says local governments don't really influence economic development all that much. They spend tons of money on subsidizing businesses to relocate to the place that they were going to relocate to anyway, because the golf courses were the best ones in the area. Businesses are relocated to the places where the CEOs want to live. That's what happens with business relocations. Subsidizing business relocations is generally not a winner for the local economy in the long run. Economic development's completely difficult, very difficult for local governments to actually do much with. However, the way you set up your policies can change the attractiveness of a place. So if we had broadband downtown, we might have a business that starts with, shared offices. Once you've got shared offices, you can stop the people commuting because now they can telework. So you can pursue policies that affect and change the way the economy behaves. You can't do huge things. And we've got to look for what do we want, and then what do we do to tweak things in that direction. If we like, if we like the way it is, and it works, I mean, it is working, there will be some natural shifting that we couldn't control anyway. I mean, telework is just going to be a bigger thing in the next 5 years, simply because everybody's learned how to use Zoom. So it'll happen to some extent. But we can encourage it to happen faster, or we can encourage it to happen a little bit more.
So maybe a goal would be to look to install an economic development office, a director of economic development, a long-term goal as part of town staff. We've talked about it, and maybe that's a goal.
I think
Suggest that's more akin to an objective, because it's something it's a clear actionable thing that's attainable, that's measurable, et cetera. The goal in economic structure is really about, I don't know, it's really the balance between the things that we are and things that we aren't. So the retail thing is something that we're not, that we want more of. Although we haven't talked about the character of the retail, it's small. We haven't delved into that. I think that's enough to go with. I don't think we need to revisit that. But the goal around economic stuff, structure, development stuff, is really what we want. Do we want to be professionals and not blue collar workers? Do we want a balance of blue collar and professional? If we want that, then we've got to preserve workplace or workforce housing. Describing what the mix of jobs and business transaction types in town are is what the goal is. What do we want the economy to look like? We're not going to be an agriculturally focused economy, but we want to preserve that piece of the agricultural economy that's here. We're not going to be a fishing village or a fishing oriented economy. We're just not. So it's the description here more than anything else. It's what we want to preserve and what we want to grow. What type of things we want to see more of.
I think it's about preserving the things that we like. We have to focus on the fact that you can drive in 10 minutes and walk on the beach. You can go 10 minutes and you can be on Duval Trail. You can drive another 10 minutes and you're at Cottrell's Farm in West Kingston, and you're in a college town. We can't single focus on any aspect, but we have to maintain each of those things, because that's why people are choosing our community. Why do you live in South Kingstown? The Guild's amazing. Why do you live in South Kingstown? The beach is right down the street. So that's why someone's going to choose us, because we don't have one identity. We have multiple identities that people are attracted to. So you can do, in one day, you could be all of those places where you can't do that. And then in addition to that, we have a beautiful main street that's charming, and there's quaint shops, and you can walk and get an ice cream or a shake. You can't buy shoes, but but you can do a lot of other things. So that's why people are choosing this community versus another community, because we're not single. We're not Warwick. We're not North Kingstown. We're there's a little bit of charm and there's a little bit of other things that people are picking. So we want to be competitive by keeping all of those things up.
Right. And all of that has a price, or has another side to it that has to be considered. And that is, we have all of those things, and you can go between all of those places in 10 minutes because there aren't too many cars on the road. There's no traffic congestion because there aren't lots of people out and about going to local shops in the middle of the day. The cars get on Route 1 in the morning and they come back on Route 1 in the evening. That means that we don't have traffic congestion for the most part on the roads during the day. If we invite, twice as many firms to come to town, the character of the community shifts. So more firms means more traffic, means less of what you've described to some extent. Now, the question is, what firms would be beneficial and are worth sort of giving up some of the leisurely driving or the congestion-free driving? Is there anything that we'd be willing to trade? What would we accept from a firm coming to town that would cause that 10-minute ride to be a 20-minute ride because there's now a stoplight or a traffic jam at the intersection and we can't get there anymore? More people will mean more congestion. More houses will mean more congestion. More firms will mean more congestion. There's no doubt about that. The reason that we've got that dark sky, that one spot on the map, is because we've got land use policies that have excluded houses and businesses in a big chunk of town. Shifting from that will change the balance. The economic structure questions are huge. They have massive implications for what happens in South Kingstown over the next, in fact, housing and economic structure, business firm inducement or business firm encouragement, housing encouragement, housing inducement, those two things are probably the biggest impacts on the town over the next 15 years, 10, 15 years.
So I think one thing that I hear Deb saying, and probably many of us feel, is that we have a nice mix in our economic structure right now, and sort of that diversity is a good strength of the town. I think it helps us be resilient in tough economic times. You can sort of see that in the economic data right now, and our unemployment rate being lower than most of the state significantly. So we want to continue to do what we've done well and focus on some bright spots and some assets, I think, in like the research and development prospects around the university, healthcare around the hospital. And then, I think one sort of thing that's really grown up recently, I mean, there's two things. There's sort of the arts and culture scene, which has grown, I think, quite a bit over the past decade, which I think is a great asset, not just for the people who live here and get to enjoy fantastic arts, but it draws people in and it sort of helps out that tourist part of the economy, keeps young people engaged and feeling like this is a nice place to make home if they can afford it. So, I think if we could, do more to support arts in town, that would be good too.
So with APC leaving, I'm thinking about what you said, Abel, about how to do it all. And if you look at that section of town, that's where URI is. That's where 6,000 students live 9 months out of the year. They have faculty. Like, is that the place where we would want to look at changing the land use? So that one of my complaints is if you're a URI parent, you can't, there's no sit down dinner place nearby. And so, you have to come all the way into Wakefield, or, there isn't one. So where do parents take their child? They're always asking on the parent pages, is that a place where we could do mixed use retail? We could do, whatever, incubator space, all of that in that. I know what's zoned over there, but that might be an area where students are naturally they're looking for a place to eat, shop, spend money, and there's a place for parents. And then that's one of the deficits, I think, in Kingston, is that they're confused on what to do. And then they're very isolated from everything. URI's already running a shuttle at this point for parking. Could we build that area up into something that makes sense? Sort of like I felt like Shepherd's Run is going to be a big win-win for the community in terms of what it's going to provide, and just a different piece if it's done well. So looking at that, because that's a big area. I don't know how big the property is and how you could work with it, but maybe that's something that we talk with the EDC about, have a meeting with them and the planning board to figure out how to shape that next generation of whatever's there.
Yeah, I think that has definitely been sort of on the radar screen, and not just for the town, but for URI, with that opportunity zone that was opened up there, but the potential that URI might get a transit hub, a RIPTA transit hub down in there, I think, and then commuter rail potentially coming into West Kingston. So I think, URI sort of expanding down the hill towards West Kingston, and West Kingston expanding up the hill towards URI is probably where most people see the opportunity for big economic development projects. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I think that is, it makes sense just looking at it from the 30,000 foot view.
Yeah, so if the goal is to be a great college town, we have to define what we mean by great, and then there's a lot of actions for us to take.
I don't know if it's a town, but it's maybe the village of West Kingston and Kingston take on, we focus those objectives in that area of town.
Sure.
And we focus other, in other areas, other things, but and that's not going to be a beach community. That's not going to, but I think that's the missing components in Kingston and West Kingston. All those kids, can't get anywhere.
Good. Any other thoughts on economic stuff? All right, how about goals for transportation and traffic safety?
Here, I would what I just mentioned with that transit hub possibility in URI, I think we should make every effort to see that plan comes to fruition. I mean, it was to the point where they were showing us drawings of what it was going to look like. And I'm curious about where those things stand now. I mean, we have a new administration all of a sudden, so we can't let it sort of fall off the radar screen. I think they were in the last stages of approving a transit master plan at the state level, which I think would benefit us because I think that hub is part of that plan. So we need to, since we have no solid control over what RIPTA does, we need to make use of sort of taking advantage of the best parts of what they're already planning to do.
Is there a broad transit goal for the town? I mean, what do we want everybody to be able to get on a bus, or are there service areas that need to be covered but others that don't?
I think we need to increase access to public transportation across the board. We have one bus that runs for the largest town in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
And to somehow try to address the issue at Champaign Heights that bus doesn't go close enough, nor is there a shelter,
So can we express those two ideas in a more global sense? We increase what's the right level? How often must a bus or should a bus be going to Champaign Heights? Globally, I'm not asking, how many minutes, but, what's the level of service that we expect? What do we want? What's the ideal?
it should just be part of the 66, if it's possible.
I don't want to get distracted by this because I want to get goals, but I will say the problem with that bus line is always the intersection up at 138. They get to the top of South Road at 138, and because there's an island there, they cannot turn left. And in fact, that island is there because the turning left was problematic before the island went in. So the buses can't go anywhere at the end of South Road. That's the problem that RIPTA keeps pointing to. So I suppose the solution is to have them do dog ear into Curtis Corner, then down, turn around to the Public Housing Authority property, come back out, and then get back on 108. They don't like that, but that's the solution to the 138 South Road problem. So-
They might even have problems with fitting a bus in some of the spaces, I'm sure they'd claim. I wonder if potentially, assuming Curtis Corner becomes the site of the high school, whether that can be, some type of planning for bringing a circulation element of RIPTA into that would be wise.
Yep.
Rob, in response to your question, how frequently should it stop at Champaign Heights? I mean, enough to cover people so that they can work different shifts. You cover people working for a second and third shift and people who need to get to doctor's appointments throughout the course of the day.
RIPTA isn't even doing that for people in Providence at this point, so they're not going to start doing
Right.
that for us, unfortunately.
But our goal is to have a transit system that has frequent enough stops to be a viable means of transportation for people to live their lives. That's a good goal. That's a solid statement of something we want. I mean, I'll clean it up as I rethink it, but essentially that's a great goal.
Yeah, and I think one of the great failings of RIPTA's organizational model is this called the hub and spoke model that they use. Everything centered around Kennedy Plaza at this point, basically, and radiates from there. What I think is great about the potential hub at URI is that it would serve as the hub for a circulator in the South County region. So just, talking about that as a goal. We'd love to be able to get on public transportation that takes us through Charlestown to Westerly.
So creating a southern hub. What about traffic safety? What's our goal with regard to traffic safety?
I think the goal is stated in the heading, right? It's traffic that's safe. I don't know how else you would state that. What's the goal for traffic safety? Well, we want traffic to be safe.
So-
For pedestrians, for the bicyclists, for other vehicles, for everyone. And
The
again,
bicycle
my
pedestrian.
goal-
Yep. The bicycle pedestrian safety, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee would say that you state it as complete streets, roads that are designed and maintained for the safety of all users, bicyclists, pedestrians, skateboarders, and motorists.
They've just finished their report out, so they'll have some great additions to this section for us, right? They're the experts on this, so I'd look to them.
Okay.
So maybe I'm not sure where this was one of my suggestions, and maybe you know where it should go, but I feel like we have a lot of boards and commissions that do some overlapping things, and perhaps this is where we've basically told Jamie Rabbit he's on a deadline now. So, and he's stretched with other projects. They're trying to write grants. They're trying to do all these things. Is it worthwhile to combine some of the committees, like sustainability and the bicycle pedestrian committee, maybe combine, because they're similar goals and aims. Maybe they're working on different tracks, but I feel like maybe that we have stretched people too much.
Yeah. So I'm of two opinions here. The bureaucrat in me says, yes, 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 take the number out, reduce the number of man hours that we have to put into attending meetings and writing up minutes and all of that. Yes. The citizen in me says, no. We've got citizens who are willing to volunteer their time, who are producing interesting work products. Let them do their work. They're doing it for our benefit, and we need to figure out how to capitalize on that. So that's it in a nutshell. Yes and no. It's certainly more efficient to pare down, but efficiency is not produces the best result ultimately. What produces the best result is, well, there's a principle in systems thinking that says you have to have variety and selection. Having many people thinking about many different things or having many people thinking about the same thing produces variety. And then the question just becomes, how do you select from the various ideas and work products that are being produced?
Right, but I also could say that there's a number of boards and commissions that aren't full. We can't get people to serve in. Some haven't met, you know, so the Route One Stewardship Committee, you know, there's a lot of things when you look at the number of committees we have. Some are full, some are not full. So I don't know. I'm just saying that they have similar goals. They could work on separate projects. It wouldn't diminish their work. It just would maybe the staff time.
So 3 things, and I don't mean to minimize your concern. I think it's real. I think it's a valid concern. On the Route One, part of the challenge there was the criteria that were established for membership. We had people who were coming forward and wanted to be on the committee, but didn't meet the business on Route One criteria. So we had a criterion that was excluding people who wanted to come volunteer for that committee. That may have been an appropriate and necessary criterion, but it was just that. It was not because we couldn't find anybody to serve. We couldn't find anybody with the right I's dotted and T's crossed. And the Bicycle Pedestrian Committee and the Sustainability Committee are 2 examples of committees that could be collapsed, but very thankfully were not in the last year. The Sustainability Committee has put forth a energy aggregation plan that will, if we ever get it through the PUC, be beneficial to every consumer in South Kingstown. It will save us all money. And the Bicycle Pedestrian Committee, in a different room, sometimes on the same night, some being, there are members who are on both of those committees, members on each committee who sit on the other committee as well. At the same night, in a different room in Town Hall, we're drafting up a bicycle and pedestrian safety plan. They were doing work in the same sphere, but in very different places. And the work products from both of those committees over the last year have been really great. I mean, we've gotten our value for money out of those 2 committees. We haven't paid them anything, and we've got a master plan for bicycle and pedestrian safety, and we've got an aggregate plan for energy savings for everybody. Those 2 committees are not an example of where I would collapse the effort.
And then there, you know, like the Scenic Roadways Committee is, you know, that has to be established by state law, right? And
That's true.
I think the same for like the Route 138, which hardly does any work. I think it only exists because there was some earmarked money set aside in 1999 or something, and we were holding that committee there just to make sure that that money doesn't disappear on us at some point. So some of these committees aren't actually that time intensive. I would say that, you know, as far as my experience goes, most of the committees are doing a good job. That's pretty much.
All right, supporting vulnerable residents or needy populations or underserved, vulnerable and underserved, I think is what you had said. Supporting.
Right. So I think part of this also plays into like Parks and Rec with the senior center being such a valuable resource to the town, but making programs available to support, you know, impoverished communities in the town obviously is important beyond seniors. So, you know, we'll often hear comments during the budget process where, you know, it's hard to raise taxes because it's going to make it impossible for somebody living on a fixed income, like a social security check, to live in town. And it's hard because we can't use tax policy, and the property tax is a very blunt instrument. You can't really use it to carve out programs to support those people who are vulnerable. So we need to do something to create other programs that make that blunt instruments not so devastating for those people. So I, open suggestions.
So one of the things we're going to talk about on Wednesday night is the state of the accessory dwelling unit proposal. And the planning board will be able to provide the council with some information on where that proposal is. We should be very close to being able to implement the zoning regulation around the accessory dwelling unit, and the tax component of the program that was discussed a year ago, or more than that, 2 years ago now, is also ready. So, one of the ideas behind the whole program for the accessible dwelling unit, or the accessory dwelling unit proposal, was to find a way to allow people who are living in properties that have appreciated beyond their means to generate income. If you can build an accessory unit, an apartment in the house, in the basement, in the attic, in the backyard, and not have to pay taxes for some period of time, so that the cost of constructing that unit is within reach, and you can generate income, then you make it easier for people to stay in their homes. It's not going to work for everybody, but it could work for a number of people who are, again, sitting in properties that they bought 30 and 40 years ago that have appreciated in value, and therefore higher in tax impact than they were 30 or 40 years ago. We do need to find ways to keep people in their residences. And I think the ADU is one tool that has potential, has real potential, has a lot of potential to help people who are willing. You have to be willing to become a landlord to make that work for you. But there may be other ways, even if you're not willing to become a landlord. If you can build an ADU, we could see multi-generational compounds building up, where the owners of the big house decide to move into the smaller unit, the granny flat, and the family can move back home, and the grandkids and the kids occupy the large structure. We've heard anecdotally, and there's some research out of California that suggests both of those things happen. People build ADUs for rent, and they build ADUs for family. Both of those things can make an unaffordable circumstance can convert that into an affordable one. It's not the only answer, but it's those sorts of things that we need to be trying to figure out.
Yeah, I think that's a great innovative start. One thing we do, of course, in town is have the elderly tax. It's not a tax credit. It was called tax abatement.
Yep.
So, is that large enough? Is that something that can be expanded to people who aren't elderly, who we think, need a break on taxes? Those are questions that is there some other types of means testing for people who are not past 65, I guess, programs like that.
Yeah, so we have looked into this, and there's some leeway. The municipal governments in Rhode Island have some tax forgiveness or tax abatement or tax differentiation ability, but it's not great. The state generally requires that municipalities tax all similarly situated people the same. And it's in that similarly situated where I think some of the opportunity may arise. But if the council wants to explore sort of means tested abatements, we can certainly get Mike and his crew looking into that again. They did some research on this a while back, and the ADU came out of that research. That was an area where we had the ability to do this without state authorizing legislation.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to hear what other council members think about that. Obviously, if you lessen the tax burden on some people, you're going to increase it on everybody else. So, it's a delicate conversation, but we are definitely worried that people are getting priced out of town too.
I would be able to, look at the facts once we saw them. How many homeowners would this affect? What would be the tax implications on everyone else? I think it's probably time to look into the actual statistics.
Yeah, and maybe the SMART committee could be looking at this too.
Exactly right.
They're going to love the fact that you've given them work.
A task.
All right.
Maybe if we could, just a couple of different levels there as well. So we don't get, one base, figure income or whatever it is. We're going to base it on age, income, maybe a couple of different levels to see, if we stepped it up to the next 20,000 or whatever, what it would look like.
Yeah, it's
time to look at it.
It's a very complicated thing because all of this stuff is so fact dependent. It's one thing for someone with an income of $20,000 who's paying rent. It's another thing for somebody who's making $20,000 and has no mortgage because they paid it off 10 years ago. So many variables go into what is affordable for a household. But we have talked about this with the statistical modeling group, and I think we might be able to produce something for the council.
For me, I think it also goes back to the first objective, is that we're spending the money in the most responsible way, and that the public is confident that we are not wasting their money, that we're being efficient with their money. Because the abatement is hard, but the spending, the cutting and spending appropriately, or not cutting, but just, I think people need to feel confident that we're not wasting their money, and then we wouldn't have to be taking an abatement on the other side. I think it goes to the first objective for me.
Rob, how about the possibility of differentiated rates based on like resident versus non-resident? I think we talked about it a few years ago, like a homestead exemption possibility. I think it's been said that if we were to go down that route, inevitably we'd have a higher commercial tax rate or an increase there. Is that like definitive?
That's right.
Where it would go?
And Narragansett has a different commercial rate than they, it has two different rates. They have a residential rate and a commercial rate. And that's really the biggest concern, is if you were to do a homestead exemption. First of all, we're not Narragansett. Narragansett sends about half of its property tax bills out of town. So there's a large number of people who don't qualify for a homestead exemption in Narragansett. We don't have anywhere near the same number of people who wouldn't qualify. Most of our residents would qualify for a homestead exemption, depending on how you define it. But you'd have trouble if you said you have to live here, have to have lived here for 10 years. You'd start getting into equal protection questions. A resident who's been here for 9 years and one who's been here for 10 years. So if you're gonna make it available to everybody who just lives in town, then most of our residential taxpayers are gonna end up qualifying. And so that's not true in Narragansett, which is one of the reasons it works over there. And you're also gonna just see the rate on business properties go up because they're not gonna qualify for the homestead exemption. They're not homesteads. It's a tricky problem.
Narragansett's real estate, property tax, residential property tax is all the same regardless of where they're sending the bills. So if their real residential property tax rate is $10, the commercial rate is 15. It's 50% more. But there is no homestead. They had the legislation passed, but never enacted the actual ordinance.
Oh, I did not know that.
That's correct.
Hmm.
They have the ability for the homestead. Well, they might have, I don't know. I might be wrong on that now. They might have taken the I don't think so though, taken the applications on that, but initially it was a 50% higher just commercial, but their commercial properties are, so if most towns are 70-30, right? 70 residential, 30% commercial. Narragansett is like 85-15, like very, very few commercial properties in town. So when the 50% higher tax rate went in, you know, it didn't affect a great deal of their tax base.
What are we here in SK? Rob?
The breakout.
I think we're 80-20. I think we're 80-20.
For the proportion of the tax levy.
Right,
Yeah, I think that's right.
right.
In terms of the number of properties, we have some pretty big commercial properties. In terms of the number of commercial properties, it's relatively small. We just did this. In fact, I sent it out to the council. You've seen it recently. What did we have for the number of commercial properties? Anybody remember? It's something like 1,600 commercial properties. And we have something like just north of 10,000 residential properties. Might be 13,000 resident. No, it can't be. It's north of 11, just north of 11,000 residential properties. So it's about a tenth.
Just as a point of reference, Warwick is like 60-40, 60% residential, 40% things that are zoned commercial properties.
Right. On the levy.
Yes.
So Rob, presumably going in a direction like that would make that ratio, more, I don't know, opposite of one another. So 85-15 or 80-20 would move closer to 85-15, so to speak.
So we're just sort of really starting to get a handle on where we are in South Kingstown with businesses, and it's a tough time to do it because of COVID. But we have seen an increase in the number of firms over the last 5 years. It's not huge. The number of firms is about 80 or 90 more now than it was 5 years ago. But we're seeing, we're seeing Schneider Electric leaving West Kingston and leaving a $16 million facility. So, having 80 small firms that are operating in someone's at someone's kitchen table doesn't quite make up the tax loss that we're going to see from Schneider leaving if that property is not sold and put to productive use. That having been said.
Wait a minute, can I just ask a question there? So someone still owns it and is still paying the
Yes,
taxes on it, right?
I was about to say so. Deb.
Okay.
They will still have to be, they will still be liable for the taxes.
So, I mean, I have a child that works for Schneider Electric, but has been working from home for the past 2 years. So them leaving or not is not going to affect her. She lives in South Kingstown, not going to affect her at all. And there's a great deal, many people that work
That's
like
right.
that right now, but the property taxes will still be paid regardless if Schneider's there or not. We just won't have the jobs on site.
Yes, that's right. Somebody's liable for the tax bill, although properties that are not maintained over time do devalue. So we're concerned about it.
Rob, I'd like to send that to the smart committee as well, just to see if there's anything workable. Crunch some data, see what they come back with.
I will bring it to the committee. It's not really an expertise that the committee has, but I'll bring it to them and see what they can, what they can do. We don't have an economist on the committee. Not that economists are the only ones who can think through problems, but it would be an important skill set, I think, to sort of really get at the implications of a sweeping townwide abatement program. one of the reasons we're pursuing the ADU tax policy cautiously. And by the way, the ADU was the response to your and the council's request for some abatement strategies. The ADU abatement strategy doesn't make me nervous because we're not taking properties off the tax roll. We're just not adding new properties, the accessory dwelling unit, to the tax roll. So there's no negative impact on the levy. It's just not adding more value, even though there is more value in the inventory. So that makes me less nervous because we're stable. We're going to remain stable for that period of time while those properties are not taxed. And the other thing that I like about the ADU approach, which is if you build something new, we won't tax it for a period of time. The other thing I like about the approach here is it also generates economic activity. It's not just something that is an abatement for somebody who's doing exactly what they did yesterday. We're creating a unit that generates income and brings money into the household that's built the unit. So we're generating economic benefit while not having a negative impact on the existing tax roll. The ADU model has been very specifically designed not to sort of be rolling the dice too much. And actually, we're going to even recommend, because this is potentially such a powerful policy tool, we're going to even recommend that we pilot it and that we cap the number of people who participate for a period of time, because we don't want a rush that has an unforeseen consequence. So we'll probably suggest a cap of, I don't know, 20, 25 ADU units to participate in the tax program for the first year or two, so that we can gauge what the appetite is and what the impacts are going to be. These are, I mean, tax policy is potentially very powerful interventions. They can make a big difference for a community. You can screw things up pretty quick if, you know, the public perceives the policy wrong or behaves in a way that you didn't anticipate. So it's a big one. I'll raise the issue. I'll talk to the statistical committee about it and see what they've got. I wish we had an economist. We don't. All right, on to URI. Speaking of, I wish we had an economist. Long-term goal with regard to URI?
So something I was thinking about earlier when we were talking about adult education, URI offers a ton of
Yes.
adult education. I think that
They
we are
do.
totally underutilizing that. So I think a goal for me would be to work more collaboratively with URI as far as providing adult education to members of our community.
Yep. So I agree with you. And we do have quite a bit of collaboration, informal collaboration with URI. I mean, we have faculty members, for example, on the statistical and modeling committee. So there's a lot of embedded URI folks who work with the town. But when it comes to working directly with URI, collaborating in the way that I think you mean, Jess, it takes two to tango, and we don't bring much to the table. You know, we don't. I mean, we want to come talk to you about how you can provide better adult services or more adult services to our citizens. Okay. We don't come to the table with much unless we're doing a public works project.
And maybe collaboration is the wrong word. Maybe we should do more reaching out to URI to see how we can use that. And yeah, collaboration is not the right word. I just can't think of the word that I would want right now.
But this is something I share your frustration in trying to describe it, because it's a challenge for us. Again, we're the tail of the dog from URI's perspective. We're not the. This is true of academics in general. They know the world. They're experts in a field, and the bumpkins down the hill don't necessarily bring much to the conversation. Forget the table for negotiating, but we just don't what do they get from talking to us? Unless they're getting, again, a new sewer line where they need it, or a new road paved where they need it. What do we add? That's part of the puzzle we've got to solve. We've got to explain our value to the university. The university does not see the value of South Kingstown the way we do. And we've got to understand how to sell ourselves to the university as being a value-adding entity. I don't know how we do that.
So maybe that becomes, sort of an overarching goal, is to increase our value as a community to URI, so that we can then begin to collaborate more effectively.
Yep.
Rob, going back to the zoning changes to the areas immediately surrounding URI to sort of promote URI-based businesses, what would be the starting point there? Kind of send that to the planning board, have them, review the current zoning as adjacent to the university, and start there, I guess.
I think that makes sense. The first thing that has to happen in order for zoning changes to take place is the public has to say, yes, we're with you. They have to say, we understand the value here. We recognize that this land use is a valuable one. It's one we want to see. So the planning board often vets those community conversations. So if you ask the planning board to investigate rezoning to allow for, laboratories, collaborative spaces, whatever it is, they will open up the public hearings and have a discussion with the public and make recommendations to the town council based on the input they've received from the public.
It would be nice to almost have this like preliminarily vetted in advance of our meeting with URI president, and then obviously the new president after that. Just say, hey, look, this is what we're considering. We want you to take advantage of this. What can you do? Mutual beneficially thing like that.
Yep.
I feel like West Kingston is maybe a better location, because Kingston has its historic village and it's quite congested as it is. And if you think about it, URI is a land, sea, what the other one, I can't remember. There's 3 land grant. It's land, sea, and the other one, agricultural, I don't know. But looking at West Kingston as an agricultural hub of our town, there's, we could just shift some of that thinking that way, instead of trying to build up Kingston, to try to maybe partnership with, I know they're doing all the agricultural work with the mushrooms and the greens and all that area. So maybe, and we haven't really talked about the farmers as one of our identities tonight, but maybe that's the sweet spot, is that we work to revitalize or vitalize Kingston to meet the needs of the farmers, but also meet the needs of the university, both research and student needs. I don't know. And that's totally a brainstorm, just based on 2 or 3 things that have been said.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, though, Deb, that if there's going to be an interface between the town and the university, it's more likely to happen in the southwest corner of the campus as it exists today than in the southeastern corner of the campus. The northeastern corner actually has some potential, but the university has to grow there. So, and that's basically the old North Road corridor, which is largely developed as residential, and the last big chunk of municipal land is about to go residential. So it's really it is the southwest corner that's the potential.
So I'm going to preface this by saying I have a degree from the University of Rhode Island, but I think in this town, not only do we have to say to the university our value, but we have to convince the residents of the value of the university. So I think there's a resistance to that here. And to make the residents understand the value of having the university here and the students in particular. Because I think we're getting to a point where people are not, I don't know, understanding the economic value and the cultural value and all of the things that the university brings. And maybe we need to do a better job of getting that information out.
All right.
I think it's also, this is just a thought. I mean, the post-COVID housing will be very different. I mean, we're seeing students move from Narragansett into South Kingstown, and that's going to change. That changes that's why there are no year-round rentals. They're very few and far between. We're seeing more and more people, more students are living in Snug Harbor. They're living in Matunic. So we need to think about, that's what I think is going to happen. The students will be more spread out. What policies do we need to have in place? We want to be proactive and not reactive to some of those changes. We know they're already here. So what are we going to do to make sure that they're good neighbors, or knowing that as they come and take more and more rentals, that's more and more rentals that aren't going to year round. That's the issue. You can't rent a house here. It's so hard for a yearly rental. So how do you welcome the URI student who has greater disposable income and will pay $700-800 a bedroom, where that is, going to price out a family. A family is not going to spend $2,100 on a 3-bedroom house, or maybe they are, but they don't exist. So those push and pulls are there.
Okay.
No,
This- With URI, and the goals that we've had are still, and most of the objectives are still live and good. So
Yeah, a lot of the stuff's, I think, stays the same with URI. One thing I remembered, the last time we had the Town and Gown event, I think it was that event, I raised the possibility of, a partnership between sort of the schools and, their School of Education, building like a mentorship program between URI students and SK students, particularly, there's a program called Eye to Eye, but I'm sure there's other programs involving mentorship that help, underserved communities. Really, mentorship is a very powerful tool in increasing educational attainment. So I know that that's really on the school side, but I don't think the school has a Town and Gown event of their own. So we should try to help foster that if we can.
yeah, we can invite, the superintendent or even the school committee, I suppose, to a Town and Gown.
Yeah, and I think actually Linda was there, and like we had a whole conversation going about, and I had put them in touch with the executive director of that Eye to Eye program, but it was right before COVID hit, and then the students were gone. I just hope that conversation doesn't die because change in administration.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. There was a very strange meeting. They were just bringing students back from China.
I just want to make sure that we think proactively about those policies, because if URI is an asset to our community, and the students really are too, then we need to have policies that work for the community and for them, and not be, I don't want to be in Narragansett where the parents are, crashing the Zoom meeting because they've changed the zoning ordinance for the 3 people in the rentals and the ACLU. We could avoid all of that and be proactive about what we want. That would be great. It's beyond housing. I mean, it is clearly housing, and the more that students live in our housing, there's less affordable housing available. That's part of the reason why it's so expensive, because you can rent academically to the students, and then summer rentals, and there's no room for a family.
That's true. All right, and South County Hospital. What's our goal for South County Hospital I don't think it's changed. We want to make sure it's a sustainable and viable hospital for a long time to come. Any objectives around this, around South County Hospital? Getting the town farm property swap done? Is that an objective that we still have?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other goals or objectives around South County Hospital?
I guess facilitate their growth.
Okay. Right. All right. Any other goals or objectives that we haven't covered that folks would like to throw into the pile of notes at this point? All right, so my plan then is to put all of this together and get a document to you, a draft form document to you at your meeting on or before your meeting. For the 22nd.
So we won't have another work session. We're just going to adopt.
No, not necessarily. I mean, that was just my suggestion. If you'd like to have the work product, it'll be before the 22nd, but you don't necessarily have to meet and vote on it on the 22nd. If you want to look at it and schedule another work session, I'm happy to do that.
I don't know the answer. I just asked the question. I don't know how it works.
It works however the council wants it to work.
Yeah, I think in the past, if I remember correctly, it's similar to this. We had a work session, discussed broad level, come back with something for us to look at, have a further discussion. I don't think there was usually a second work session, but it was like we would take a look at, the proposed changes as a, agenda item, see if we wanted to make further changes, and eventually we could make those changes right there or have it at a future meeting.
I just also, because we're going to meet with the planning board on Wednesday. I don't know if we were going to meet with the EDC. I didn't know what else was coming, if that would change some of the goals. That's why I'm asking.
Definitely, I think the conversation on Wednesday is going to impact it. I think Rob was planning on that, so we sort of glossed over land use and housing earlier because we're anticipating that. So yeah, I think any work sessions we have in the interim might influence this document potentially. And, if we decide that we can hold off on having, a set of goals and objectives for a month, we can decide to schedule other work sessions if we like.
The only thing that I would suggest really matters in terms of goals and objectives is we do want to incorporate them into the finally adopted budget because we're supposed to be budgeting to do the things that the council wants us to be doing. So I want to make sure that this will inform our decision making between now and March 1st anyway. We have a good sense from this conversation of where the council has priorities. This was very helpful to me, so I want to thank you for the time you've put into this tonight. But I would like to have a final document, certainly, ideally before March 1st, but certainly before the final adoption.
And that's at the end of April.
That's correct.
Very good. There is agenda item 3, Review of town council's rules of conduct. I don't know if folks felt ready for that conversation or if there's a whole lot to discuss, but since it's on there, we should probably at least bring it up.
So I just had one question or one change proposal. So in Rule 10, it's the speaking by the public section. It says that members of the public shall be entitled to speak at regular meetings, blah, blah, blah. But up until like 2016, residents could speak at items of new business. I'm not sure how, if it disappeared over COVID, but that, if we could put that more specific language in there, that would be helpful. I think the community in new business would want to be able to have a little bit of a dialogue with the council, and that that would just be one more opportunity, because if public comment happens before new business, they don't get to hear or ask any questions, and there's no back and forth necessarily during public comment. So if we could just maybe make that tweak, that would be good.
What do other folks think about that change? Anybody?
I don't know. I'm going to need to think that one through. So, I mean, sometimes there are many, many items on new business. I mean, we can have a truck, right? We're purchasing a truck.
Yeah,
Do we want to open that up to public comment, the purchasing of the truck? Every item, right? I don't know. I think we saw an example of it. I think you're right, Deb, the other night when people wanted to speak about the school facilities plan during the time we were discussing it. So there's value in that, right? But I don't know. I'm not prepared to make that change at this time.
Well, for example, somebody asks questions. I think it was actually Joe. He asked 2 or 3 questions, and then because there's no dialogue with the council, those just hung out there, and then we never came back and even addressed his questions. So I just feel like we talk about public participation, we talk about community engagement. I agree. Like if they wanted to have a conversation about a truck, that might not be there, but the public is really turning out for the big things. So, but if it's not specified, we don't have that opportunity for them to participate.
But let's talk about like Joe's question. So who should be answering those? So when Joe asks a question, and he asked some questions, who amongst us should we designate as the person who answers those? Or should we all just answer them in our own take on things? So that's what I need to think through, right? So I'm not ready to make this change. I need to think that logistically through.
That's fair. I just feel like that I appreciate that. I just want us to think about that new business, that they don't have, that the public who comes to the meeting and wants to contribute and have that conversation doesn't have that, and that it's just disjointed from the matter at hand. Maybe it would change public comment because people would wait and comment during new business. I don't know, but it's fair to think about it. But I think that's an opportunity we used to have that. People could come and speak on items of new business, and somewhere it went away. I don't know how, or maybe because we're in a COVID world, we're not in the same place. So you don't hear someone in the audience gesturing, and maybe we were like, okay, come on up. That was what would happen. People would come and speak to that issue. People spoke at the town manager's report. I mean, people spoke at all different times because they were in the audience. Without in the audience, there's not that way. So it just says, it's just adding that. But I think you have every right to think about it.
Yeah, my memory is different. I don't remember new business items ever being just open for public comment. I have from time to time as president opened a new business item to comment when I thought it was, a simple thing that would help elucidate the matter. the council, this decision-making, but it's, I think the way the meetings have always been designed is for new business items to be really decided at the council table with discussion between council members. There's public hearings to gather public input on certain matters for changing significant policy. There's public comment. And that's sort of the way it works. Like if you go to other town councils, city councils around the state, it's very similar to the way those meetings are run. I don't think new business is generally an opportunity for public comment. There's usually just that one portion of time for public comment in most meetings that I've been to. If you go to the school committee, it's similar rules in that regard. I think there is, if we want to have some type of process for opening a new business item to public comment, that's something we could consider, like a motion, to open any new business item to public comment could be made. Gets a second, there's enough votes, we open it to public comment rather than leaving it as a decision to the chair. That would be something we could.
But Abel, would, in your mind, does public comment constitute public debate? Because I don't know, I'm, you know what I mean? I don't want to get into I guess a contentious sort of give and take amongst council and the public, right? And I feel like that possibility exists. So I don't know. I think there's a few things to think about here.
Yeah. Oh, that's a separate matter. Like public comment portion is really not a conversation between us and members of the public, so to speak. Often, we're very accommodating in general. I think that that's something we want to maintain as a town, allowing people to ask questions and then giving town officials or us the ability to respond to questions. But the public comment is for the public to express its opinions on matters. If the town can give it to get information from us. So that's that. And then there's public hearings, which are different to my mind. Public hearings are where there really is an engaged conversation between us and people who are offering testimony. And then, that oftentimes we at the council table might not have an answer for people who are speaking at a public hearing. But then we have town staff, or we have the applicant who's looking for some type of change. And ideally, those people are well enough informed. They can provide an answer that satisfies those people, that we can all together be comfortable in making the change that the public hearing is there about. I don't know, Rob, do you have any general sort of ideas on?
So you're right that generally speaking, councils, not just in Rhode Island, not just in New England, but around the country, have typically one opportunity for public comment. And it typically comes before the new items are addressed by the council, with the theory, I think, that if the public gets to comment on it before the action is taken, the public might influence the action that the council is about to take. I was sitting here thinking, as I was listening to this discussion, about whether or not you effectively make every decision a public hearing. You don't, and I don't think there's any legal issue. I think you could open up, as a matter of routine or by some procedure, you could open up new business items individually or in total to public comment. And there's no rule that you'd be offending. It's just not the standard practice. The idea of having, if you have a particular item that a council member would like to open, that might, it might make sense to have a motion and a second and a vote. And if the votes carry and the council wants to hear public comment or allow for an exchange at that point, you still have as a council, some control and discretion about your schedule or your agenda as you're going forward. That's not, it doesn't offend any principle that I can think of.
So I like this idea of taking this into consideration. And even if it's just something that we're thinking about before we take action on it, it's always great to hear from the community. And I think any way that we can do that and make that process, better is great. So, I liked Abel's idea about making a motion. But definitely something to think through.
I just don't like the optics of then saying, nope, your motion doesn't, you're here to speak and we've decided, nope, you're not, we don't want to hear it. I mean, most of the time the people are coming forward, they're not coming for a small item. They're coming, matters to them. And we've just closed them out of the dialogue. We've closed them out of that new business item. It could be hours later and they want to, they've heard our speech, they've heard something we've said, they've heard something that's been communicated by the town manager, and they can't ask another question. They're out. So I'm just for about bringing the public in and not keeping the public out. It just seems sort of, I don't know if elitist is the right word, but it just doesn't sit right with me when we talk about our budget message is better, or we do things so inclusively, and then there's this one little opportunity that now we're going to say you have another gate, you have to get a motion, and you have to have a second, and it has to pass.
So that's a great point too.
I mean,
I definitely think it's something that we should be thinking through and figure out the best way to make sure that everybody feels heard.
So I would offer this observation, and the rules, whatever they are, both defend and offend somebody. So if you open up the citizen comment period in two different places, but one is designated on the agenda as citizen comment, those not familiar with the procedure will think that is their only opportunity, may comment there and then leave the meeting. Those who've stuck around and been around council meetings enough know that they're going to get a second bite at the apple, and therefore, have a different and disparate impact or potential impact on the decision making. It's better. I mean, the chair's discretion, the council president's discretion, the chair's discretion is sort of the default for things that aren't written, things that aren't sort of established. And the council, the body, whatever the body is, always has the right to appeal that. So if the chair decides to let someone speak and the rules don't specifically allow it or specifically prohibit it, you can say, look, I don't think you're doing the right thing here, Mr. Chair, and ask the council whether or not that should continue. You can turn that on its head and make it when one is allowed to speak and they shouldn't, you can challenge the chair and say, this isn't really within our rules and I don't think it should happen. Or if somebody gets up and wants to speak and the chair says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to allow that right now, you do have a mechanism for challenging the decision of the chair. You can appeal to the body. I mean, I don't like the idea of creating an environment where that happens, but there is a mechanism.
Just seems so not South Kingstown for someone to say I have something to say that we would say, nope, you can't unless you get the motion passed. It just doesn't seem, when you talk about welcoming and inclusivity, if somebody feels so moved to talk about whatever it is, that we would then say, nope, you had your chance. But that's okay. If the appeal is going to be that, but you see the example where Abel doesn't recall that was allowed, but it was allowed. It was part of routinely there.
But it wasn't in the rules. The rules
Right, so,
changed. Yeah.
Right. So we can amend the rules to just reflect that we could allow it.
But you are fundamentally changing the nature of your meeting at that point. You really are. And that, if the council wants to do it, I don't see any reason why you couldn't do it.
but there's a reason why it isn't routinely done. And the reason is probably that it drags meetings out forever. And it's also probably, I've been in public meetings, not here, but in other places where there's a lot of give and take. The rule for school committees probably grows out of the thing that I've observed. And that is when there's a lot of give and take, South Kingstown's lucky because our citizens tend to be pretty intelligent and pretty reasonable, but a lot of give and take creates a lot of emotion because people get frustrated when the answer they're hearing, or they don't feel that they've been heard correctly. And when you have folks who aren't articulate in particular, it can be very frustrating to try to publicly speak and engage. There's so much going on that you create frustration. So I think that the public comment period sort of regime that has grown up, you have your chance to speak, you speak your 3 minutes, you can have your notes, you say your thing. Generally speaking, councils do not engage in a give and take. That's an unusual thing. Here it happens and it works. Most places it does not happen. And when it does happen by mistake, or when it happens because someone loses the discipline and doesn't do what the rules require, it tends to degrade into an unpleasant exchange. So limiting it to one period of time when people speak, can be heard, have the opportunity to provide their input, and are not responded to is the typical situation elsewhere.
This brings to mind one question that I have for the council, which is the time limit for speaking. It is 5 minutes in the rules, as I remember. Are we happy with that? Also, I have the habit of allowing people to speak twice or even 3 times during the course of an evening on a given matter. Do you folks like that, or do you want me really just to hold the line and say people can speak once for 5 minutes?
So
So
I
I would,
the 5-minute rule is good. And I think letting people come back for a second time is good. But 3, 4, 5 times, I don't know. I don't know. I guess on some issues that's okay because they might have something more to add, but perhaps limiting this. So right now we let people come back as long as everybody else who's wanted to speak the first time has spoken. That's perfectly reasonable, right? Come back again for 5 minutes again. Come back again for 5 minutes again. I don't know. I think we should have some limits on that. Come back again for 3 minutes, come back again for a minute if you have another point to make. I don't think that's unreasonable. Because we know we have, many people who want to speak on many issues, and that's great. But if everybody wants to come back 3 times,
I agree. Yeah.
It's going to be a tough go. Just logistically.
it's tricky because I want to hear from everybody. I want to hear everything that they have to say. But I don't want it to get to a point where some people are backing off and not waiting, and they just leave the meeting and don't ever get their chance to speak, or that it goes on so long that we don't get to hear everything. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I think reasonable time limits need to be, we need to talk about those for the second and third pass. What if somebody wants to come back 4 times?
I think I've generally stopped at that point. But yeah, I said, if people are comfortable with what's been happening, that's what I'm trying to get a sense of. Because, unless people tell me to change, I'm probably going to continue to operate.
I think you've had a pretty good handle on it, Abel. I mean, we have seen a couple of times where people went on for, maybe too long, but I think it's the president's decision. I think you, as the president of the council, have a handle on what's on that issue. Should probably be your call.
Okay. One other question I had around sort of rules. I mean, this is, I don't know if it's really around there, but we decided in the last council when we're looking at appointments to boards and commissions that we want to interview everybody, even reappointments. We want to continue that tradition. I suspect so, but I just want to confirm.
So what's unresolved to me is for the speaking in public is what will we do when somebody asks a question? Because they're coming to the microphone, they're asking whatever, and we don't even necessarily all say thank you. Like it's just silent. And I've been on the other side and it's like blank, no affect, and they move on. It's uncomfortable. So how do we address, like, where is that opportunity to have that dialogue with the residents? Because, I mean, could I say to that person, I'd like you to continue speaking. Excuse me, Mr. President, could I have them continue? You know, like, I don't want someone to talk for 20 minutes, but I also feel like, you know, we need to strike that balance. I definitely think 5 minutes is plenty for, you know, a soliloquy, but where's the dialogue that we have with the community? Because we don't have that. We're not doing it during new business, and we're not going to do it, you know, may not do it during, I'd like to do it during new business. It doesn't look like that's happening, but it just seems odd that people just, it's a one-sided experience. I don't know.
I mean, I try to thank everybody who speaks at a meeting about any topic. So correct me if I don't do that. But I would say that, you know, in public comment, we'll take comments from everybody who wants to speak. And then in general, you know, if there is a specific question, I think that it, you know, it can be answered by somebody at the, well, probably not at the council table, but town staff generally. I'll direct it that way and ask them if they can respond to it. Leave that up to them. But then, you know, in terms of what we would say in response, I would generally, like, you know, after everybody's spoken at public comment, then I'll open it up to members of the council. And you can use that time to say whatever you want. You can respond to specific questions that you've heard or general questions. You know, feel free at that point to speak.
So all response to any questions from a council person should go through the president, right? So we should say, Mr. President, will you allow me to answer that question? Right? Is that?
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, oh, if somebody really wants, you know, ask a question, somebody really wants to, you know, take a whack at it, you know, let me know. I'm not here to wash you.
No, but again, it should be at the president's, I mean, for someone to ask a question, why do we need a new plow, right? And 5 of us have a different take on that. I'm
Right. Yeah,
struggling with the debate portion of this.
Right.
I'm struggling with that. And I can't agree to the debate portion of public comment. I think we are there to listen. If a specific question is asked that is answerable by town staff or by even a member of the council, then we should attempt to answer that. But not to engage in a debate.
I agree. That is the purpose of public comment here. So again, the protocol would be, you know, if somebody had a specific question during public comment and you wanted to respond to it, you know, ask, and I'll probably allow that to happen. Rob, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, just one other observation about the council's rules here. There are rules of decorum that apply to the council and that apply to any member of the public speaking during a council meeting. Under the rules, members of the public are covered by the same rules of decorum as any other member of council. So the sort of directing to the chair and all of the sort of nice formal structures are there for a reason. You're very lenient with them. The council is not a very formalistic council. It's got, I mean, I have to tell you, I think that the meetings, every meeting I've been at in South Kingstown since I got here, it's just it's a very warm, engaging, welcoming town hall. The meetings run at South Kingstown Town Hall are really, I think, very accommodating to the public. I've never seen any community anywhere that has, you know, the level of exchange and the level of dialogue that goes on in your meetings. They seem to work very well for making sure that people don't leave the room frustrated. So what you guys are doing, I think, works. I don't think, you know, I don't think it's terribly broken. There may be tweaks on the fringes, but, you know, it's not terribly broken.
Thanks, Rob. And, you know, I think that is, that's a good point, you know, and, you know, if I'm falling down on my job and not holding people to decorum, please raise that issue with me and ask me to do that. I do have the gavel, but I do not use it very frequently. So I try to keep the meetings pretty conversational and, you know, laid back, I suppose is the word. And, you know, that will be my attitude going forward. All right. Well, is there any other discussion under rules of conduct? All right. Very good. Well, I appreciate all of the discussion tonight. I think it was really nice to hear everybody's thoughts on goals and objectives. Definitely a lot for the town to think about, for us to think about, and I'll see you all on Wednesday for more. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Well,